Well, here we have Ian's Fender made in Mexico Telecaster. I think it's a 1999 number, and it's in for a refret and a setup. And currently the action's really quite high, but Ian likes a fairly high action by the sounds of it. So have I got my book of notes? I have got my book of notes. Let's put this down here and I'll consult my book of notes and see what we've got. So in this we've got we have got 1999 made in Mexico Fender Tele. We've got a Tusq. We're going to have a Tusq adjustable nut in there. This one, since we're refretting this one, although it looks pretty good at the moment, it's going to be it's not going to work with the new frets. So yeah, full setup. We're going to go with Evo Gold frets, which came in today, so that's good. We've got 11 gauge strings, and we've got a curved bottom black Tusq nut, which is right here with Ian Tele written on it. So that's going to end up being our adjustable nut. So looking at this, well, first of all, it's got Wilkinson, so it says that's been changed out to a Wilkinson bridge. Full thickness body, good familiar Telecaster stuff. Nice neck, fairly chunky. Fender locking tuners. Yeah, all looking in good shape. Bit of a crack down there, as it's quite familiar on these guitars. Oh, sorry, there goes my camera swiveling. Now I'm going to get a quick look up close, because there's something about these frets that kind of make me think this has been refretted before. So there's the telltale marks. See that? A little sort of pull out shapes. It may not be, but it feels like that to me. Could be wrong. Anyway, it's been well played. Looks like it's fairly flat in some places and worn with grooves in others. So we're going to go for some fancy Evo Gold. Okay, so let's zoom out, and sorry about this terrible camera work. We'll zoom out for a minute, and what I'm going to do, let us think what we've got to do. Well, I think we'll just go straight into the removing the neck and removing the frets, because that's the start. Let me just check one thing on this. Yep. Okay. Have a look under the cover while we're at it, but I think we haven't really got anything planned for under there. There's no problems with the electrics or anything like that. So I'm going to go straight into removing these strings, and these are monster 11 gauge. Oh, I did a quick measurement. The the high E last fret action at the moment is 3.5, and Ian's asked for it to, can I set it at 2.25, which is quite a bit. It's about a millimetre higher than my normal target, but that's fine. I might still level it to, you know, a reasonably low level and then just bring it back up to that. On the low, it's currently at 2.75, and he wants that also at 2.25. And he wants a straight neck. At the moment, there's quite a lot of relief on it. It's 0.4. So, yeah, we'll flatten that out a bit as well. I'm just having a think. Well, we're gonna adjust the neck a little bit later on anyway. Now, here we go. Fender Mexico Maple, my nemesis. The fear of finding yet another one of these Fenders with the finish that likes to fall off. I don't know if this is going to happen, but I've got into the habit now of warning people when they send in any Fender with Mexico or USA with a maple gloss or maple polyed fingerboard, that there's a risk of it flaking off and the problem I've got is I don't know which batches or what years. There you go. That's the thing about the locking tuners, it completely crimps the string and risks breaking them, as you can see. Yeah, so I don't know which batches really are the ones. I have no further information or specific information. I just know that I've had a couple now Fender flake outs, and the problem with that is you find yourself in a situation where you have to refinish, which can be a major ball buster, I should kind of say, because you got to go right back to the beginning. Now, I'm going to try and keep these 11s for the time being, because we're going to need sacrificial strings a bit later on. I might have some kind of throwaway or sacrificial 11s anyway, but it's probably just better that we keep these out and use them if we can when it comes to fret leveling afterwards. But we have already lost a bit of the length of the high E. No, it wasn't the high E, I think it was the G. Anyway, we shall see. We might be able to find a replacement if it doesn't fit exactly. Anyway, so news from the Reloved Guitars world. Today is going to be the day. Today is 1 year officially since I moved in to this workshop. I just took the keys this day last year, 1st of November. So I've been here a year. It's kind of amazing to think a whole year has gone by of me standing up in this little place. And it's been a very good year. I'm happy with how it's gone. It's interesting that when you sort of take on it or get into a new venture like this, you sort of, part of you thinks, oh, I'm gonna, what am I going to achieve in this year? I'll go from this to this to this. And actually, you better still be running. I don't want your messages, thank you. You sort of, sometimes you get into, getting all ambitious and thinking I'll do this and I'll expand and do that. And actually, often reality is much more humble and much lower key. And I haven't done any major earth-shattering things in this year, but I've done a lot of good plodding, keeping on, carrying on things, so I'm happy with how it's gone. I don't have to have sort of world-shattering, big hairy goals, as they used to say in the corporate world. It doesn't have to be that. I think I've done some spraying this year with my new spray equipment. I think the first time I ever used it was up here. In fact, I know it was. So I've done a load of spraying, different paint jobs in the summer and the drier weather. I've got in a few things like the planer thicknesser, the spray equipment, a new router, things like that. So and done, just kept on really, and done quite good business. Enjoyed working with people on lots of different projects, some of them still ongoing. Okay, so we've got a curved nut slot, and this was originally, it's the same kind of same kind of nut as I've got here, almost, well, in fact the same. So I'll take the middle bit off this one as well. Okay, so we have to do the job on this maple made in Mexico neck. Now I think what I'll do for this, I'll take off the rest of the bits and pieces as well, because I don't want tuners and whatnot in the way while I'm fretting, so it'll all come off. Yes, so this is, it's exciting and scary refrets, because they really are all important. You know, it's the absolute heart of the guitar, and I really enjoy doing them, but I always worry every time I do one. I'm always worried about how it turns out, and will it be good enough. So I suppose it's a good thing that I'm not complacent about it. I don't. There's no chance that it's perfect. You know, you can't be complacent. It's never going to be perfect each time. So I have to stay as awake and focused as possible to get this right. Come on, you. Yeah. So anyway, so a year down the line, right at this moment in time, I'd say I've got as much business as I need at the moment. I've got a couple of commissions on the sort of slow burn, one for Nick and one for Vince, and they're from scratch builds, which I'm really enjoying taking slowly, step by step. And they're the first two jobs that I'll be doing the neck from scratch, which is a new one to me, so I'm making sure I'm trailing it in front by doing making one for myself at the same time. So I'm just ahead of the game, and then I'll follow up as I kind of get a bit of experience. I'll follow up making the other ones. Now this I've just got this is flaky already up here. This Fender logo is ready to fall off. So I don't know if you can, how well you can see that. It's very flaky. One hit with a screwdriver and that would fall off. So here's the thing. Okay, so what we're going to do to make this thing work now. There goes my little hex key onto the floor. Is this the right size one? No, this is not the right size. It's too small. Let's get a key. Yes, so yeah, lots of different exciting different jobs on the go, and more coming up. I got an email from Andy Partridge from XTC the other day asking if I was interested in doing some more guitars for him and his producer guitarist friend. So that's great too, to get a repeat job there. Now this hex key isn't working, so I'm going to go to my hex key department, where somewhere in here is the thing that I had marked Mexico hex key, but of course I can never find the one I marked. That I'm going to have to be a bit hit and miss. There it is. Yeah, so a couple more guitars for Andy, which will be fab. So the thing about the hex key on this is, so people talk a lot about the different ways of extracting frets. How do you get them out with the least amount of damage? Now, this maple tends to flake a lot less than rosewood in my experience. I've not worked on millions of different woods, but and nevertheless you want to get the frets out with the least amount of damage, and particularly I can see there's kind of dents and chips on the finish here, so there's a possibility of some flaking out, but can't really prevent it if it's going to do it. So we want to get the frets out with as little damage as possible. If it's a rosewood fingerboard, some people like to wet the fingerboard first, or the fretboard. God, blimey, this one just about works. Yeah, they like to wet the fretboard to soften the wood up a little bit, and then they heat up the frets to soften the glue, which may or may not work. What I'm doing there is I'm back bowing the neck slightly, so it's curved backwards, as much as possible, so that theoretically the slots aren't gripping the frets quite as hard as they might otherwise do. But I have to say there's not an awful lot of adjustment room left, or not much adjustment I can do. There's a bit of back bow on here, but this also might be one of the reasons why there was 0.4 relief on this guitar, because 11s with this little back bow suggests to me that one might find it difficult to get a dead flat neck the way that Ian wants it. Okay, so that's bending back as far as it can go. I'm looking down here and I'm seeing, I'm not sure what I'm seeing exactly. The lights are on, the lights are on. Where was I seeing it? Down here. Okay, is this some detritus that's built up? Yeah, probably. Okay, well, I'm going to get, oh lordy, I was going to get, this is going to make all the fretting work difficult. I don't want to press anything down on here, but I have to hold this neck down. It's been scratched and sanded, so I think this is being rebadged. That's my feeling, even though it's probably a Fender neck. Anyway, yeah, so I don't want to be pressing on this because it's blistered. The decal is blistered. So if I put grip on it, it's going to have to be there with a bit of foam as well. So what I'm doing this for is so that I can, where am I going to do it? I'm going to do it this end. Yeah. I'm going to use my funky craft knife fret pulling technique, so I need it to sort of stick down a little bit like that. Okay, let's see what we can see. Excuse me, better view. So this is alright. So the point here is I don't really think I'm going to get anywhere by heating this. We could do, right? There's no harm in that. So I could bring up the soldering iron up to here. A bit of a kerfuffle because it's a two-part one, but let's see if we can assist the frets. Now, I've seen there are some people. I think people like Scott Grove, if I recall, is what you'd call an iconoclast. He doesn't accept conventional wisdom unless it kind of concurs, matches his experience, or is confirmed by his experience. And so he, I think his take is heat, schmeat, doesn't make any difference. Water, heat, all that malarkey nonsense. So I don't know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of heat, and I'm going to get some old blades for this job, and I'm going to bring my old clippers. So the reason I use a blade to start this thing up, start the process going, is because the fret pulling plier things I found have a nasty habit of sorry, I'll get there in a minute. Nasty habit of crushing the end of the frets, which we don't want at all. So I'm just going to grab a few of these. So they're like playing with fire. But yeah, these things here, to get a bite on the fret, you tend to end up digging down into the edge of the fingerboard. So what I've learned to do, some of these have been used for this purpose already. That's not such a clever idea, is it? What I've learned to do with these is to use a blade right at this corner here, and to get an initial bite, and to lift the fret that way, and then we can finish off with this, but it gets the thing moving first. Now here's our soldering iron. It's not set massively hot, warm. I think we'll probably may see that this doesn't really do much. I don't know. Some people figure, you know, it's worth doing even if you haven't got any proof that it's going to make any positive difference. I'm just going to see if it is actually getting any heat in there that I can feel. So the answer is not just yet. Thing is, if you're using this together with this, then you tend to be able to keep the heat on it. If I'm going to use the blade, I'm going to have to put this thing down, pick up the blade, so it will be cooling down by the time I even get going. But let's give it some warmth there. Put this down, start with this. So the first thing I do is get the blade, I'll try and get the blade under there like that, and then I break the blade on the fret. Wow, this is really stiff. So that's quite an interesting indicator that just to get this moving, that's broken a couple of blades, but it gives it a bit of movement. So this is, I can see this is lifting up a bit of the few flakes of wood, but at least what we're not doing is we're not crushing the end of the edge of the fingerboard to get it up. Now there are some other devices that people sometimes use, which are these little thin fret protector strips that you sort of are supposed to hold on. That's right, the tang, or the crown will cover any little chip there. Yeah, the little protector strips. The problem with those is you can't actually get them on while you can't get them on until the fret is lifted. You can't lift the fret until you've done that first bit of lifting, if you see what I mean. And once you've got it lifted, you don't need, you know, it's done the pulling it's going to do, so it's not a great setup. I mean, here's the other way. Typically I might have done this, so I would have started with this on the edge here, but there's absolutely there's no bite at all on this edge, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do some warming and carry on the way I was going, because that's removed that without any damage to the edge, which is where we want it. If you haven't got this technique under the belt, then you may have to use your fret pulling pliers, and you may have, your set may kind of encourage you to crush the edge of the fingerboard as well. And if that's the case, then at least my advice would be start at the it's not going well. Start at the top side, away from where your playing fingers will be. So this is, I'm trying to twist and get this lifting, which is now done, but that's a lot of hard work. These are very well fitted. So I'm just going to now kind of nibble my way along here. If I felt that the heat was actually doing anything, I could kind of track along with the soldering iron, held nicely between the kind of jaws of this thing. That's one way of keeping heat going into it. I suppose it's worth doing once we've got it started. So, alright, we'll carry on in that style. I'm not really sure that heat does anything for this initial bite. What you get left with is some kind of grime which you can feel, and that grime is going to be quite critical to wear down or tidy up. So I'm going to make a little tool just to sand this bit alone. That's quite a sort of precision little thing to do, because you don't want to extend and sand the area out past the footprint of the crown. Wow, this is really tightly held. I'm trying to get as much lift under there as I can, and it's twisting the blade, and it gets the thing moving like this. Oh yeah, we're going to go with heat, aren't we? And it gets it moving without any damage to the edge, and I can get my tang pulling fret pulling thingies, pliers, whatever these are, under there. So that's doing the biz. So it's the initial lift that I'm using my dangerous snap-off blade technique for. Actually, I've done whole refrets just with that, when I wanted to show, how you can do a refret without spending on expensive, specialist equipment, which is sometimes what the kind of luthier world sometimes wants to make you think you have to spend loads of cash. But I'm resorting to these pliers, but actually you could use the snap-off blades the whole way through. And my number 2 ebook, 6 Steps to Guitar Build Heaven, shows how to refret and upcycle a neck using just snap-off blades, and no special fretting tools, just a small hammer and some small-ish wooden blocks. So you can see that it's coming up. There's no major flaking going on here, which is good, and it's just a matter of, you've got to get that first bite, get the blade under this edge. It's actually incredibly tightly fitted, so I'm having to work quite hard just to get that first lift. But it's, I suppose with the experience you can know when you've got the first bit moving, and then when you've got it moving, the rest will come up easily. I don't think water on here would help, mainly because it's got that satin-y poly finish on it, which should effectively stop the water going into the wood, so I don't think it would be a very productive thing to do. I think the idea when you're doing it with a rosewood fingerboard is that the wood can a little bit soak into the water can soak a little bit into the wood itself and help the process of loosening the fret or the tang. Now these are one good thing about this neck the way it is that we can use a saw, because there's no end fills or anything and there's no binding, so we can use a fret saw, slot saw, to go through here to clean them out, so we've got absolutely clean slots. I think it would still be probably good to fill the ends of these with a filler, so kind of cut an overhang when I come to fret these, as if it were had a binding to it, because then we can sort of fill, so undercut it and then fill with some end fill material. There you go, that's lifted quite quickly, and that gives you a very smooth looking finish. It's a particular look if you go all the way through with the metal, which this one kind of is. The tang is practically sticking out. You can touch the metal of the tang. When you do that way, it looks okay, but it looks a little bit rougher than if you do it with a little bit of an overhang and then fill the ends, fill the gaps at the end, which I quite like to do. It's smoother. Both cases, when you trim the edges of the fingerboard, it's very likely that you cut the poly here, especially if it's already worn out. There's a very strong chance of cutting the poly as you bevel flush with the edge of the neck. There's no way around it. It's another one of those aspects that it's just impossible to avoid it, because by definition, if your end beveling file is beveling flush, then it can only be beveling flush by virtue of the fact that it's touching the it's trimming back the metal until it's absolutely microscopically flush to the wood, and of course, or the finish on the wood. And to do that, you can't stop it from hitting the finish and taking some of it off. So it's quite common that I have to add some touch-up poly. Usually, sort of, if I do it, it's usually a hand applied a white one poly if it's necessary. Sometimes if there's enough there you can get away with it, you can stop before it does too much, digs too much into it. But it's, like I say, it's one of those things that it is literally by definition it will go that way because of what you're doing. You can't bevel it flush. See, these things, they've got the perfect thinness, but they kind of break as well. Yeah, there's no ways around it really. So what I found with this is that getting it as far under as you can, and then a bit of a twist does the job. But you will go through some old blades. These are all reject blades anyway, so that's not a problem. So the secrets of refretting are preparation at all stages of it. So you've got to prepare the surface that you're going to put the frets into, and you've got to prepare the frets that you're going to put into place, and that means making sure that each of them, each part of the deal, see, this one doesn't want, there you go, that's under, each part of the deal is as prepped as possible. Go on, get me head start. That one's giving up the ghost. Yeah, so in terms of preparing the fretboard for the new frets, this is not doing it yet. In terms of preparing the fretboard, you've got to make sure, thank you, that the slots are clear, they're deep enough, and equally importantly, the neck is not bent backwards, it's flat when you fret it, and also make sure that the surface of the fingerboard, where the crown of the new fret is going to sit, you've got to make sure that that is sanded back flush with the rest of the fingerboard, otherwise it will sit proud or sit high, and it'll work, you just probably end up having to level off more fret material than you'd ideally want to. So to avoid that, you've got to get the slots prepared very well. So you see what I'm doing, I'm having to dig in a little bit and then try to twist upwards, except now it's breaking. It's funny, it presents a bit of a problem when these are very well fitted, very stiffly fitted, tightly fitted, and that's what's going on here. And that's a good thing. They've been fitted well some time in the past. So I've got that one moving. Getting the sharp blade underneath the tang is quite a tricky thing. Anyway. Yeah, so preparation of the neck. So best way to prepare the slots to make sure that they're deep enough and free of detritus is to go through them with the correct slotting saw, and I'll do that, and then once I've done that, I will hand file or hand sand with a little tool I'll make, or I've got made already. I will clean up the surface of the old place where the crown sat previously of the old original frets, or the previous frets, because these might have been done more than once. Then the second part of preparation is getting the frets ready, and what I'll do tonight before I finish up is you'll see me lay out and cut all the new frets and trim them to the ideal length, cut the overhangs or the underhangs, whichever. Now, unlike when we're fretting something that has a binding down the side, the overhangs on this need only to be just enough to cover up the metal ends of the frets so they don't show. So we're just kind of cosmetically sealing the gap. So that doesn't really need much. Come on, you. Thank you. Yeah, so we'll prepare the frets by cutting them to length, cutting the underhangs or the overhangs, and then trimming them. And actually, the other thing we can do is, as we cut them, when we cut the overhang, we make an overhang by removing a little bit of the tang, the vertical bit at each end of the fret. And sometimes when you do that, you leave a little bit of the stem of the tang, for want of a better word, and that can hold the fret slightly off the fingerboard a little bit too. So we have to, it can be a useful thing to do to just file that down by hand as well, and that's kind of, you know, long drawn out and boring, but it's worth doing well. The more time you take in the preparation. And then comes a question really of before, actually I should go back one, before doing the cutting of the frets and the tang overhang and so on, we want to cut the wire to the correct radius, and that's quite important too. Once we've got it to the correct radius, then we cut all the pieces for this neck, and we do the overhang and preparing the new frets. And then I suppose an important question at that point is, are we going to, well, I suppose there's a couple of questions really. Are we going to use glue at all? And if so, what glue? Now, I think a lot of guitar makers, when they fret guitars from the off, they don't use glue. You know, the tang on modern frets is supposed to do the job perfectly well. Sorry, I've forgotten. You can't see what the hell I'm doing. I'm ever so sorry. I just think you can follow me up the neck. I'm such an idiot. Yeah, so yeah, they're made to, the little diamonds on the tang. The idea of those is that they sort of grip the wood as they go in, and make sure that as long as everything's not too loose, it will fit nicely, and those little diamonds will press into the wood and hold the frets there. That requires that your slot that you cut is very closely aligned to the width of the tang on the frets you're using. And I don't know about you, but I don't have a full set of things for every possible tang thickness, so it's usually a little bit of hit and miss to make sure. There are some times where it's obvious that I'm using a jumbo wire, and the what do you call it, the original slot size is too narrow and they need widening a bit, so I have to do that. And basically I end up having to do it in whichever way I can get it done, and sometimes it ends up being quite unorthodox pieces of equipment. For example, I've got certain what do they call those things, hacksaw blades, which just happen to be 0.6 millimeters or 0.8, I can't remember which, but happen to be exactly that thickness. So if I know I've got to widen to that, I'm not averse to using a hacksaw blade to just widen the slots out where necessary. So it's kind of work with whatever you've got that will do the job. So I'm just twisting this up to get this end up. Getting near the end. Then we get on to a fun part. Well, we'll clean out the slots first, and then we'll get we'll make up the little sanding tool. It's not the most perfect thing, but I made it from piece of jumbo fret wire, and it's basically a curved piece of fret crown with some sandpaper stuck to it, a very thin strip, and the whole thing is kind of radiused so that it curves over this fretboard, and hopefully allows me to clean this little strip here. And it's down to how I hold it, basically. If I'm not careful, I'll wander either side, but even if I do, it's usually it only lightly scratches, and the new frets tend to sort of minimize how any wandering of the sanding tool. But it's one of those little homemade tools that I really like to come up with when needs must. So we're 3 frets from the end, all going well, no disasters. You know, if you use this method, you've got to be fairly confident of using the blades up close and with quite a strong grip. But if you're confident of that, you won't go wrong. And you get, once you get the blade underneath the crown, and then you get it in a position where you can introduce a sort of twisting motion which ends up lifting the tang, lifting the crown just enough to get you started, and that's the important bit. But I wouldn't be able to do that if I was just using those fret pliers themselves. They kind of demand that you dig in horribly hard at the edge, and it leaves an impression. It's not the end of the world, but it's a bit ugly, and I wish we didn't have to do that. So even there, I've kind of a little compression. It wasn't quite out as far as the rest. Oh well. Anyway. So today is also the first day of the, was it COP26 thing, where suddenly all our politicians have become massively concerned about the environment, which is good. I'm glad they're even using some of the language they're using, ergo making it important enough to put it centre stage. But funny, I may have said this before in an earlier video, but I wrote when I did my master's design masters at Goldsmiths in the mid-90s, all them years ago, I focused a lot on environmental design, or design for the environment. Okay, there goes my phone. Yeah, focused on design for the environment, and I wrote some what do they call them, critical papers or dissertations or those things, theses. Yeah, I wrote. I think we had to write about 3 different papers, and all of mine were about design and the environment, and I was critiquing green design at the time, eco design. It was the early sort of days of body shop and everybody kind of commodifying environmental concerns. Right, let me go and find the tool. Haha, the tool. Here it is. Well, how cool is that? Yeah, so anyway, I wrote this paper on the subject, and I wrote it from in a very childlike way, you know, and saying that basically, but I kind of said what Greta Thunberg is saying at the moment, which is the biggest problem in all of this debate that people are having, or have been having for 30 years or more now, is that, as she said, there is always a myth of perpetual growth. The idea, there's a belief that we can somehow save the world and continue to double, treble, triple our standards of living and so on. Keep business can keep earning more and growing infinitely, and I wrote this paper that said this has got to be completely insane if it's true that we live in a planet with finite stored resources and a finite amount of trickle through, if you like, energy from the sun, which is always coming in and being capable of doing work and being stored, but as with solar and wave and so on. But those things don't make they're very different from burning fossilized dinosaurs and stuff in the form of coal. Anyway, so it was a frustrated set of papers that I wrote saying why cannot politicians please apply a childlike understanding to this, which is any kid would know that if you had a bag of sweets and somebody asked you to share them out, even as a kid, you would know that you had to ask some difficult questions. So you would ask, well, how many people do I want to give sweets to out of this finite bag of sweets? So for how many people, at what rate of sweets, how many sweets each, and for how long? And those questions, even I argue that even a child really wouldn't have a problem understanding those, but our governments and politicians and clever eco-designers and marketers and all that seem to have a real difficulty behaving as if that were in fact a real serious constraint, which it absolutely is. And so obviously everybody wants more of everything all the time. So nowhere in the environmental debate, perhaps only until very recently, has it been even possible to say, well, who do we want to have this level of access to energy? The standard of living for everybody. Okay, well, if there's finite energy in this planet and we want all 7 billion people to have an equitable share of it, then the truth is that we in the West don't want to ever face is that we would have to share. And in sharing, we would have to go without an absolute ton of the things we think of as normal. And that's when you quickly hit the buffers and realise that, and it's borne out by the fact that we've not achieved it very much in saving the planet from this mass extinction thing. But the fact that we're absolutely unwilling, it seems, to do anything if it means we become more uncomfortable or less comfortable. We don't like the thought of sharing stuff out if it means we have to wear sweaters, or we can't drive as much, or we can't put our heating on, or we can't really take as many holidays, or whatever the heck it is that we most value. So it's all good and theoretically good and sweet until it threatens unpleasantness, bodily unpleasantness, I would argue, where it impacts on our comfort, our everyday comfort that we pretty much take for granted. So I was back there saying, the whole of the eco-design debate at the time was all about, seemed to be about trying to find, technical wonder solutions, and my argument was, until we establish a basic relationship with reality on this issue, then we're piddling in the wind, shall we say. We're wasting our time, because it's in a fantasy land, and it's what Greta Thunberg kind of talked of as the blah blah blah, and she criticised the fantasy of perpetual economic growth, you know, as an absolute given. There was no questioning that at all. You couldn't question that. You know, shareholders of businesses must expect more revenues all the time. It's written in law that chief executives of businesses are legally obliged to maximise, to act in ways that maximise profits for companies that they head up. You know, I mean, there's no backing out. You know, it's enshrined in law. That's what your obligation is to do if that's the job you take. Anyway, so yeah, it seems that that's the sort of limits to what we're prepared to do. You know, anything so long as we don't have to face reality and say, oh well, how many people do we want to have? What standard of living? You know, because if there's a finite amount, you can divvy it up in different ways. You can say, well, look, we want all 7 billion people to have, you know, to share, have equitable access to it. Then what it means is we only all get a little bit. That means the starving peoples of the Western Sahara or whatever, I'm not saying they are starving, but you know, people in who know real poverty, then they'll get a bit more, but that means we'll lose our holidays and our new consumer goods and access to eating out every whatever. You know, are we prepared to do that? Well, guess what? It falls down straight away at that one. And then if we say it the other way, well, actually, we've got a finite amount of stuff. What we're going to do, because since we can't all have more forever, that's obvious, and since we don't want everyone to have an equal share, because that means, first of all, me giving up what I've been historically privileged to have and sharing it, then the only other option is to pretty much say, well, actually I've decided that these people should have more for as long as possible, which means that means we have to kind of wage war or steal the reserves and resources of these people over here so that our chosen people can have more. And that starts to verge into some pretty uncomfortable historical precedents from the middle of the previous century, or the first third of the 20th century. You know, that those peoples of those times kind of said they were blunt enough to say, okay, I suppose in the days of the German military government or whatever, you know, the Reich, they said, you know, there's a finite amount of stuff, but we're the ones that are going to have most of it, and that's the fact. So what it means is we're going to wage war pretty much with everybody else who's going to be used and put to work serving us, because we've decided that we're going to have the bigger share of these resources. And that was pretty unpleasant for everyone else in the world. But at least you would say, even though it was horrendous and, you know, led to a terrible cataclysm in history, at least you might argue that there was some degree of realism at work, in that probably you could argue that the people deciding that, as with anyone who decides to kind of conquer other peoples for their resources and so on, at least they are recognizing that one way of dividing stuff up is to not try and share it. I'm not saying that's right. I would prefer to share things equitably. But anyway, so that's what I was writing about at the time when I was doing my design futures dissertation with a focus on environmental stuff. And actually, it was interesting because there was a lot of discussion and research going on at the time amongst my peers into, you know, we were all looking at, you know, what could design do in this you know, to help this environmental crisis, and a lot of people were looking for ways to, you know, make products, you know, have a circular lifespan and those kinds of very, very noble things. I took a slightly different route, and my interest was designing in such a way that you could help people experience spending longer and getting more attached or building up a more meaningful relationship to their possessions or their objects, so that they would be more present with them, or designing objects that people would be more present with, so that they had a stronger sense of owning and relating to these things, living with these things, being with these things, and wouldn't enjoy the process of constantly upgrading and changing them out. Of course, you can tell that's not a very popular take, but it was what I was interested in doing, and so I sort of set out a manifesto for design, which actually in some ways is still very much at the heart of what I've always done and like to do with Reloved Guitars, which is to create a deeper relationship with somebody, between somebody and their guitar, for example, whether it's the ones I'm setting up and making work better for somebody, or whether it's one I'm making for somebody or I've made for me and have sold to somebody. They're all of everything I do is about trying to create a deeper and better relationship with the thing, so that people will stick with the thing and have a richer relationship with it. And I think as people get older, I think a lot of people I know are doing that with guitars. Ben, who came down to do some work here at the workshop last Friday, he's could see that he's sort of gone through his life and come out at a place where he just loves the old guitars with character and stories, and the ones that challenge you and need saving and require kind of thinking about and time investing in and so on. And it's really great, because I think that's what makes things worth having. They're not throwaway. There's nothing more soulless than throwaway, and I think we all know that. I think that many people aren't self-assured enough to resist it. When the marketing push of, upgrade to this, get a new one of those. Hey, get rid of this after 15 months, and then you can have a early swap out, or whatever they call them, early upgrades. And I don't think many people really enjoy that. So anyway, that my interest has always been, if I did anything, it wouldn't change the world, but if I did something, I would like to always have somewhere in the back of my mind the idea that maybe the thing I do is about helping to create that longer relationship with possessions, and cared about objects, and things. What better than a guitar, really? As we grow up, if we stay with guitar playing, we change our relationship to guitars over time, and they become quite special. And it's sometimes when I have customers who ask me to upgrade, or refurb and upgrade an old classic of theirs, and you can sometimes tell the youngsters or less mature people who haven't reached that spot where that matters to them, and they come along and they see a customer spending £500 or something on an old K catalogue guitar, getting it re-fretted, re-radiused, all the equipment changed, all the hardware, all the pickups and electrics and so on. And the people who don't get it about the relationship with these things, always start out by saying, well, you could have bought a Gibson for the price of that, and it's always a sort of an assumption, that's what's the priority for the person who's brought this guitar to me. And of course it isn't. They've reached a place where something about the connection they've had with it is much more important, and you can't explain why that's important to somebody who isn't at that place yet in their lives. So they just don't get it, and that's okay. But they think my customers have gone loopy. Why would you spend anything? You should have put that in the bin and told them to go and buy, you know, whatever my favourite guitar is that I think's worth paying 800 quid for, or you know, and that's okay. That's what you would do, but it's not what everyone else would do. So there we are. First thing done, the removal, or so the cleaning up with this little thing and this little strip of sticky paper, and I probably need to change it, and that's probably to make it stick better. I ought to really sand back this tang. It's a little bit bumpy, which probably doesn't help the adhesion, but anyway, it worked long enough, this little thin strip. It's not perfect, you know, by definition these wear in between, so it's all of these fret slots have little peaks coming out of them, but that's just the way it goes because of the wear around it. Now we could re-radius the fingerboard completely to get that out, but then we'd have to refinish it and it would lose its originality, so, or its character, some of its character. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to just make sure at this point, actually what I'll do is I'm just going to put a little tiny notch at the top of here, just to soften up the edge. Yeah, so we'll just clear the slots out. Where you can see at the moment. So we'll then run the fret saw through it, clean it out. If you haven't got a fret saw and you still need to clean it out, you can do it with, for example, one of these blades. That's quite good for cleaning the slots out, or any thin metal that's fairly firm. A very thin screwdriver you can drag through and clean it out. So I'm just whizzing through here to give it a sort of start grip point for the saw. Yeah, like I said, because it wears down underneath, in between the frets, you do end up with all these frets sitting on little peaks, which isn't a bad thing. It's not the end of the world, right? So this is. Let me just double check the thickness of this. Where's my? It should be 0.6 millimeters. 0. Oh, 0.5 actually, I should say. Well, it changes depending on where you grab it, but between the teeth it's 0.5. So you want to just clean through. Now you need to just stop the other end from moving at this point. So another clamp just to stop this moving. Well, the blade teeth on this are pulling backwards, so it's going to pull backwards to do its cutting, really. The only downside about this is that it leaves a little bit of scuffing on this Perspex guide. It sort of shines the picture, shines the finish on the fingerboard. So it's not absolutely critical that I use the guide on here, because I'm just cleaning. That's better. Just cleaning these out. So that's probably more of a hindrance than anything. So just having a drag through and cleaning the gunge out. I'm really just dragging the teeth remember, this is about making sure there's absolutely nothing sitting in these slots that are going to cause the new fret, to sort of stop on its way in and sit there high. We don't want it to stick up, because it will end up meaning we have to, if it sets in place but high, we have to then level out the difference, which is a sort of fairly destructive way of having to do it. It's much better that we get this clean, these slots clear from the outset. Now, what you can do is, once you've done this, go back and do it the opposite way, just to be on the safe side, just to make sure. Again, I'll spin it round, but make sure I'm only gripping this safe bit up here, away from the logo. Okay, so a little bit more sawdust coming out, that's fine, makes it nice and clear. It's always the case that you really can't do any harm having slightly too deep slots, but you can make a mess by having too shallower slots, because they will stop you seating the frets properly. So the frets are quite happy having some fresh air beneath them. They just don't, they really don't want to, they don't want to be too shallow. Down a bit, do the last three. So what I'll also do, once I've just gone through here, also get one of these, my famous, what do you call them, craft knife blades, snap blades. Snap off, you know the ones, and then I will run through just to make sure. Now if you're at the stage where you don't quite know how deep the slot is, there's a simple way of finding out, is put your blade into it, line up another one flush with it and check, and that's the depth of my slot, okay, which is more than enough for the fret tang, I can tell you that. So I'm just making sure there's no obstructions. That one's got something in the way. At this point in the game, you've got to be very careful to keep this blade tip in the slot, because if it comes out, you get an unpleasant stripe down your fingerboard, which you don't want. So this is very clean. There's nothing much coming out here. So we're kind of ready to go on to the next bit, which is preparing to cut the frets. Okay. So what we have is, we check the radius. Now we think it's a 9.5, and it is pretty much dead on. So first thing we do is we get our fret wire down, and here we have it, Ian Tele. This is the Evo Gold. Now what I keep forgetting on these things is this wire, the way it's coiled up or the way it's done, the wire, when you put it through the fret any bender, something about the way the benders work, excuse the expression, is the first inch of either end of the wire that you're bending is slightly flatter. So knowing that we've got 2 meters of wire, which is enough to do this this guitar with some spare, which is good because we don't have to panic, and if we get anything wrong we can remake things or make some new frets. What we'll do is we'll make sure to cut off once we've done the bends, we'll make sure we cut off the first inch of the 2 pieces. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I don't know how well you can see this, probably on the other camera is better. Here I've got the fret wire in its full length, 2 meters. So what I do to get it evenly is I hold it, kind of let it fall to where it wants, and that's its halfway mark. Let me get one of my cutters, and I go down the bottom of here, and I go, there's my 2 pieces, equal size, right? Now, what I don't know just yet is what the radius of these pieces are, so I'll just kind of hold it up or put it down, doesn't really matter, probably down on the bench, but just holding these up, and it happens to be, this comes out perfectly at 9.5. That's quite coincidental. I'll just check the other side and make sure that's the same. I'll do this one on the bench, and I would say that is as good as you're ever going to get. So I don't even have to go to the fret bender machine. Now here's what I do. Start the process. I'm going to know that I'm going to lose an inch at the start and finish of each one. Here it goes, first half. Goodbye. And then I'm going to cut like so. Now I'm going to try and do this without these. Sometimes these cutters put a little ding on the fret wire which you have to polish out, which is annoying. It's something to do with when you squeeze it closed, there's a little bit here that catches, so if you keep it out of the way, a higher angle, it should be alright. So I'm cutting with an excess overhang, and it appears that these are going in alright. I'll keep cutting, and then what I'll do is at the end I'll double check the tang width. This is pretty much the same gauge of wire as came out, only obviously fresh and new, so we'll see it should have the same size of fret tang as well, but we'll double check. If you have fret wire or fret slots that are too loose, and you can't obviously tighten the slots up, what you can do is you can bend little twists onto your fret tangs to give them a little burr, if you like, that will help them to dig their little burrs or their little teeth into the wood in the wall of the slots. So it doesn't have to be, there are little tools you can buy for that, they're quite expensive, but I found that you can actually do it with a regular pair of cutters, side cutters. You've got to be a little bit careful. It's like you bite a little nick out of the piece, but it seems to work okay. So you can see I'm whizzing along, cutting the basic pieces out. And remembering we'll get to the end of this and we'll lose another inch off the end, whatever happens. Even if we think we're going to turn it into a fret, we'll lose that flat inch. Actually, the truth is, because I cut this pre-coiled thing in the middle, it probably doesn't only need it at the very ends. It's the start and finish of the coil that seems to be flatter. But just to be on the safe side, we can ditch it anyway, just so we don't get confused about whether we have got the flat bit on board or not. that one flat bit can make the difference between a single fret standing up at its on the edges of the fingerboard, and then you've got one slightly high spoiling everything else, which is a real pity. We don't have that situation if we can help it. Evo Gold is a beautiful gold wire, as you can see. It's more brittle and harder than normal copper nickel wire. So I like it for its colour, I like it for its hardness, and it is a premium wire, so there is a premium to pay, but it's so good looking. There goes the useless inch that nobody wants. And we'll check this, and we can see, don't know if we can see it, I can see a flat spot right there. That's going. So come along here, look down here, there we are. So tomorrow I'll plan to press these frets in. Drop your fret wire. Right now I'll be just cutting and trimming. Now what I've done is I've lost which edge could be the flattened edge, and I think it's probably that one, but maybe there isn't two, there was only one actually. Okay, hold on to the coil. So having a few frets worth spare like this, you have to buy two meters to do a whole neck, but it gives you plenty of left over. And the good thing about that is that if I get to a situation where half a dozen of these frets I just don't like them, or I've had to pull them out but then I've bent them in pulling them out, then I can just redo. Okay, so right, let's just do a quick check. Let's find the original wire is here. Let's do a quick check. You never quite know with these things. 0 tang width, 45, that changes, 51, 46, 60, depends on whether you're in the sort of bulbous bit or the skinny bit, 55, 50, I would say 50 is about right. Let's take a look at this. Okay, this looks bigger. So we have got a slightly bigger tang, thicker tang. So that means we've got to go and just very lightly, it would help to widen these slots a little bit. And we can work out exactly how much. Now, like I said, we can either do it with something like a hacksaw blade, which is a fixed thickness, although this one is a little bit too thick. This one, it's 60, but it goes through with a little, it's got a little corrugation. Let's have a look and see what my razor saw is. That's probably too little. Yeah, that is, that's 25. Let's just check the coping saw, which is sometimes a good source of blades, and the coping saw is actually 50 millimeters, so that's not a bad size at all if we need to do it. And if we don't know whether that works or not, we can always take a test neck, like this, let's have a piece of, a test piece of wire. Let's see. A different radius, but again that's quite snug. So let's take our coping saw and see how well that widens it. There's my widening, crudely done. And if this was even vaguely the same radius, that would probably go in nicely. So what's good to try out, and I'll just get a little block here, is when we tap it in, just get a feel for how tight it is, and you can usually tell. So it's quite good to do a little test block like this. Like I say, this was actually bent to a different radius, so but that's gone in lovely. A bit ham-fisted. Yep. Okay. So that's probably about right if we want to widen it. I'll do that fiddly bit off camera. So we're looking at 63, something like that, and we're looking at 59, 61, something like that. But they go a little bit side to side. They're a little bit offset. So the width is something like 65. So it's pretty much spot on that coping saw blade width. And when it's the correct radius, that fits on beautifully well. And that's actually with no glue at all, and that's a tight fit. So it'd be great. I might even do one without glue. Why not? If it matches up just that well. Okay, so we've got that to do. We'll come back to the widening bit. You could buy loads of expensive tools, but they're just saws that will do exactly the same thing. And if you've got a saw that will cut you out, widen the slot to 65, then it's a saw that will widen it to 60.65. So first thing I'm going to do, and it's a bit of a slow process, but we start down here and we take one of these and we take our tang nipper and we cut underneath the tang. I'm going to do a little bit more. Now you have to, this tool, you have to limit how much you cut. And like I said, I might use 2 of these. Like I said, we don't want a massive overhang, so I'm going to use this one that I can see what I'm doing, even though it's a bit knackered. I can just line up a bit more precisely. Slightly ragged cut as well, because it's knackered. Right, so then we've got a little overhang, underhang, and it has, I don't know how well you can even see that, but it has, let's see if I can show you. Okay, there's my underhang. It's got a bit of a gnarly end there, but that would be beveled flat anyway. And you can see where the tang came off, there's a little stub. So my advice at that point is I have, I'll just go and get it, I have a block over here that I put a sort of groove into, and for the purpose of using a little file, which is over here in turn. Let's bring all of these because we'll need them. So here's what I do. Let's see if you can. Where's my block? Oh yeah, there's my block. Just come the other way. Just bear with me. Okay, something like, where are we? Something like this. Where's me? Where's the working end? Fool. Sorry. Okay, it's because I'm going to get. So I've got a little slot in this block, and I put the thingy in. It's called the fret in there, and then I can use this file to flatten down that. Hopefully, we can put it on the end or however, which way it works best. But I'm just going to take out the tang stub. And I know that means this end bit will then sit really well when it comes to fitting it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it there close to the edge, not perfectly on the edge, and I'm going to get a marker pen, which I'm running short of now. I need to go and buy some more pens. I've got one in here. No, not the one I want anyway. Okay, this could be, geez, oh, just stabbed myself on something. I suppose I could get away with one of these pens. Oh no, actually I've got one over here that might just do the trick. Right, so anyway, the point is I'm going to do all of these down the side like this, and when it comes to it, I put this one in with the tang near the edge, but not quite at the edge because I want a little gap. If I can see what I'm doing here, it's not going to go in just yet because I've got to widen it still. So we're sort of close to the edge with a little bit of an overhang, and then on this side I would mark up a trim point. But I'd go down this side and do all of these first with the underhang, followed by the tidying up. Maybe not using this darned mucky file. You can't see it, but I'm off camera, just getting lined up to smooth out this tang root. It's not actually that easy to do, but probably worth it because it ensures that it won't stand proud of the surface. So get that in place, line it up, mark up the next trim on the next one. So I've only I go all the way down one side and getting one side ready, and then come back and do the other side. So it's all a bit slow and fiddly, so I'll go off in a second and make a cup of tea, and then I've got the widening to do. Oh yes, the other little thing, I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, the other little thing for which small pliers would be handy. Let me go find some. Can't find the ones I want. Yes, I can. Here they are. Okay, so sometimes it's not so bad on this one, but sometimes when you've cut the tang, you get a little curve right there, which needs just a little bit of a bend. It's not happening with the Evo Gold. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's only a thing that happens with the copper nickel stuff. But anyway, yeah, I would just straighten that out as well. Again, just one more thing to get as right as possible before we go any further. Okay, so I'm going to get all of this done tonight and then head for the hills, and tomorrow we'll pick back up with the fret leveling. Okay, see you in a bit. Okay, so we are next day, and it's time to end bevel these frets. Now, the thing I've done is I've filled the fret end gaps with some stuff, but, and there's a big but, the problem with it is I'm struggling to find a material that does the job. Does the end filling job very well at all. There seem to be lots of well, you could try sticking anything in the end, but you've got to find something that isn't going to mess the whole thing up completely or make things impossibly difficult. You know, it's just a quite a challenging little setup to fill the end bits. But anyway, really all you care about is getting something that is about the right colour and fills them nicely. So I've put some plastic wood in there because I had some left over, and we'll see how that goes, and if it's crap then it's crap and I'll put something else in afterwards. See what we need. Now, to begin with, I am gently drawing this back and forwards to take off some of the sharp bits on the fret ends, so that we get a smooth approach, smooth run. Now, when you get to this stage, you do have to think of something at this point. You have to say to yourself, what angle do I want on my new frets? Let me zoom in a bit, because when you think about it, that's about as good as it gets, is it? Yeah. So when you think about it, if you make them, if you bevel your frets vertically, okay, you've got more fret width. If you make them come in this way, you've got less fret width available to play on. So in this case of this guitar, there wasn't any sort of risk of the strings being too close to the edge, so I don't really have to worry about that. But sometimes when you're at this stage, if you've got a narrow neck and a wide bridge, you can actually adjust how you bevel the ends to sort of add or help solve that problem. So one of the most challenging aspects of this process is keeping this wicked tool on the frets themselves. There's a very real risk of this tool skipping up and over the frets, and you can see how beautiful these new frets are. If I end up accidentally skipping this horribly rough file up and over these frets, the edge of this file is going to rip the hell out of them. So whatever happens, I have to make sure I keep a downward pressure and try and go more repetitions more slowly than too much force, but always maintain the downward force. So what you can see is I'm putting a mixture of sideways force to make it cut and downward force to make it stay in place, and I find it quite a crude system, although it's effective. Even this, over the years, this has worn a little bit, so this tends to want to, even on a new one, it tends to want to rock up like this and go over the top. So the idea is that I'm going to sort of mostly keep the file vertical to begin with, or just this side of vertical, just to trim the frets down flush with the fingerboard. And again, I still have to keep them very carefully, keep the file down, and I'm watching it to make sure it's nearly vertical but not completely vertical. What you'll find is cutting at this end takes a little bit longer because you've got more frets clustered down there, so you have to kind of keep that in mind. But also you can miss this end here because you're reaching and you don't have so much sideways pressure. So there's a sort of couple of things to take into consideration. So just keep going about 1 or 2 degrees off the vertical to begin with, to get these trimmed right flush with the edge, and you'll start to feel when you're almost flush and you're nearly vertical. And again, these end ones can take a little longer, and you can see it's throwing up a bit more metal swarf at this point. So I always like to brush out the leftovers. So now we're starting to cut the finish a little bit here, so we are kind of as flush as we're likely to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go vertical for 1 or 2 run downs, just to clear up any overhang at all we've got. Now I'm slightly off the vertical, so I'm now starting to put a bevel on the end. So again, just taking a look. Now we know that we'll clip the finish. I've said this before, it's impossible to do this job without clipping the finish. It's geometrically, physically impossible, so you will do it, and if you're lucky there'll be enough material there for you to micromesh it back and just polish it up with the remaining poly. That's an easy way around it. If that isn't the case, then I'm always sort of standing by ready to add some poly at the end of the thing when all the end fills are done and the frets are pretty much mostly rounded off the way I like it. Okay, so that's the frets fitted. They're always sharp on this face here. It's like a razor blade. Obviously that's the way it's going to be because when we run flush with the wood, everything gets millimeter perfect. So it has a very slight trim of the wood or the finish here, which I might touch up with a tiny bit of poly at home, but that's as beveled as I need to go. So it's a pretty good outcome. What you probably find is if you polish this with what do you call it? Different grades of paper going down, probably even from the sort of 400s to the micro mesh. This little bit here will probably shine up just really nicely, and it won't feel like anything at all. But alternatively, we can just touch it up with, if we want to, with wipe on poly. So that's that side done. What I can tell you is that the end fills are mostly full. They could do with a very light sanding back, and this is where, if I go to the 400 grit, for example. Well, actually, I'll do that a bit later because I'm going to do some filing as well. So what I'll do is I'll file these ends, and then I'll do some sandpaper at a kind of an angle, and I'll clean up to make sure it's all really smooth, even if it's thinned out on the poly on the very edge. And this thing is not, it's not a new neck, and it's in used condition, so it actually doesn't have to be refinished. It'll work pretty well and feel great as it is, but we'll make that judgment call in a minute. So what I'll do next is I will get ready to do the other side, and this works a similar way. So I've got sort of an end stop at this end, so I can push against it and keep it there. I'm going to use the same supported clamp at this end. It's just a matter of finding out, getting into a position that I'm comfortable-ish using it. And then we're going to go and do the same thing, so we just make sure everything stays where we want it. Okay, so now, first of all, just getting rid of the sharp burrs. I was able to trim these back pretty far to begin with, so that's good. So it can take quite a while to get rid of the burrs and get to a point where the file will run smoothly. To begin with, often it kind of clack, clack, clack and sticks in between the frets. So you have to be careful not to be pushing too hard, or else you end up banging the frets sideways where they sit, which is definitely not what you intend to do or you want to do. So I'm a bit off the vertical to begin with, so just looking to take away some bulk of material here. And because I'm off the vertical, I'm not in any real danger of overcutting the edge of the fingerboard or anything like that. Just getting rid of excess fret. Now this one's quite hard, so you have to kind of push down at this end. Because of the shape here, you don't get a lot of run up, and if you pull too far backwards, your fret will cut a gouge in the top of in this bit of the headstock here, which you don't want. So again, it's sort of coming there. So this process of end beveling is very important. I probably said, you've probably heard me say times before, is I never expect to begin with a set of frets, or I never expect to put the frets on, end bevel them, round off the ends and then play. It's probably 1 in 30 happens to be microscopically level enough to do that. We expect every time to need to level the frets with the banana method. So I don't feel anything like, oh, why couldn't it be perfect? It's never absolutely perfect. It's just a bit like it's impossible to cut these frets absolutely flush with the end without touching the finish, without scraping the finish. You can't do it. Now I'm going to, at this point, I'm going to go down here And I'm going to trim these back vertical now. So this is the bit where I'm likely to scuff the poly on the side of the neck. The closer I get to vertical, the more likely I'm going to scuff it. But if you don't, you'll still have a bit hanging over, which will always feel rough. So I've got to make sure I cut this first one, because it really doesn't want to be cut. Okay, not bad. So sometimes you get better than others. Now with this fretting, I wouldn't be surprised if this guitar could play straight off. I've got a feeling about it that it's one of those fret jobs, but I could be wrong. There's nothing you can't guarantee, or you can't go on what your eyes alone tell you in this business of frets. The banana will tell all when all's said and done. So it's at that sort of point where you speed up, and reach is where, if you're not careful, you run the risk of the fret end beveling file skidding and slipping. So I'm just going to stop and take a look and see where we're at. Yeah, a little bit of just touching the edge here, not bad. All round it isn't bad at all, but what we don't want is any overhang that we can feel. It's just about spot on, and the same here. Okay, so these are by definition now very sharp. If you played with these, you'd be feeling it all the time, but having said that, it's a pretty nice refret. Now if you're in the sort of mood for checking, you can get your old fret leveling things here. I don't know how absolutely straight these ones are, but you can do a check here. Oh, even Stevens. Yeah, I might be right about this one. Ooh. Yes, we could actually have any there? Tiny bit there, look at that. Right, this even could be uneven for all I know down here. So as I said, we expect a tiny bit, but that feels remarkably good. Now, here's a bit I really enjoy every time, and that's the fret end treatment. Now, I've never, in all the time I've been doing this, I haven't yet found the perfect answer to this, so I'm always on the lookout. We've got, so we look at this, we've got fret ends there, and I don't know if you can see them, but they are pretty sharply cut. That's a sort of microscopic cut, and what it means is that around about here, this face here, these edges are really, really sharp. So we need to soften them off, and to do that you have this sort of concave fret file. Let me zoom back out. Concave fret file, and you can run it down the fret like this, give it a little bit of backwards and forwards, and it just takes off the the sort of razor sharp part, and that's doing very little very little rounding off, and it sort of goes almost into the corners, and I'm keeping it low as possible. And so it's really a matter of trusting your fingers. If you can go over it with this file like this with as little rounding off as possible, but you end up with playable fret ends that don't catch the fingers in any way, then you've done all right, and you need to do less. You don't need to do so much going further. I've never quite worked out which works best, the long strokes or the short ones. Seems to be much of a muchness. You're just rounding off the blade part, really. It doesn't take much to do that. And so after that, we then have a sort of overall feel, and the idea would be from there onwards to try and soften these ends of the frets out as much as possible as we go through. Now, it may not require any more file work with this kind of file. We may be in a good enough position to move on, ready to do the precision fret leveling to get this thing absolutely set up and leveled for the action that we want. And in this case, we know it's not going to be the lowest action, but it doesn't really, that's got nothing right now to do with the softness of the fret ends. But when we level it, level the frets, then in the polishing out process it becomes the time to do the next end softening, I suppose you could call it. I call it that anyway, because once we precision level and recrown the frets to take into account whatever flat spots we've added, which I suspect were very little on this set, but we'll go through the process anyway, and then we'll get ready to polish out the recrown and then polish out the frets. And in sanding and polishing them out, we get to do the edges as well, bring them into the polishing regime, you could say. And in doing so, we can sort of move the ends of the frets down through the paper grades that I'm doing the rest of the frets with. So we end up with quite soft, rounded off frets. So right now, that feels pretty nice, and it's still sharp. So, well, not sharp, it's still a little sharp, but we know that we can round those off a bit more. We can also go down the frets and just take these little corner bits off that tend to stick out, and this in some ways it's kind of slightly spoils the end shape of the frets, because when you first bevel them, they look like perfect train tunnel arch shapes, and then as we round them off with files like this, we soften them a bit, but they start to lose that sort of, I don't know, not factory precision, but that mathematical precision. But the problem is you can't have that precision and soft, comfortable. The two don't go hand in hand. They are precise because they are razor cut flush with the neck of the fingerboard. So if you want them softer and lighter, easier to the touch, we have to do this. Now, what I sometimes do with this is to, once I've got these little corner bits softened off, then we can have a re-test of how it feels, and if it's really a case of judging how it feels, and if it feels like it's ready to just leave it now until post fret leveling, then that's the best thing to do at that point. And it actually does feel like it's in that sort of zone. What I have got down this end still is we've got a little bit of the material I used let me, if I'm looking for something, to fill the end fills. That's just sticking up a little bit. So I'm going to get a bit of 240, and I'm going to carefully just run down the very edge of these frets, and I'll take off the end fill, any excess end fill material at the same time. And what I'll do is I'll do two versions. Do one version as a little sort of tube shape in a minute, and I'll do the other version, first version, as a slightly flat thing. Right. Now this is good for shining up the edges of the frets. As you can see, I can both take off the excess of end fill just like that, and then I can get it back into the fret ends and clear up anything else, but also start rounding them off and get rid of any scratches from the files, and have a look where I am. So nice and smooth, starting to look good. Do the same gently down here. So sort of little gentle run down there to get rid of the filler material, and then lean into the fret ends with a little bit of a curve, So that's a sort of 240 soften up. So everything looks nice and smooth. So what I think I'll do at this point, we're going to go 400. So I'm going to use a bit of this now. I'm going to do the same thing now at 400, and once I've done this, then I'll be ready to leave it till after the fret leveling, and then bring these frets into the polishing process, and make sure I just hit the ends of the frets as we work it through. So, and this will keep the ends of the frets looking really nice and smooth. So I'm kind of leaning across into the frets at this point. I'm catching the edges of the fingerboard a little bit, which is fine. I don't want it sharp anyway, but I'm leaning onto the frets more just to start rounding them off. Now that colour paper introduces a bit of a grime onto the thing, but that's now starting to feel really good. And I will now follow up after the fret leveling. I'll bring the whole of the edge of the fret into the sanding out process. So that's very good. Okay, well, while the neck is off, the next thing to do in sequence is to get ready to have ourselves an adjustable Tusq nut. And we're going to replace the original one with this one. And this one currently, it actually has, it's interesting, it's got this, we know this is a curve, this has got a, oh no, this is the original, that's why it's sitting in perfectly. It's the original without the little foot on the bottom. Here's the replacement with the foot on the bottom. This will stick out too far because we've got the little replacement foot. So the first thing we'll do is we'll just sand off the little foot, and I can use the Dremel for that, or even the spinny thing over there. It's a bit heavy duty, but I'll just get rid of most of that, and then I'll put it on a little block. Now this little block went to market. This little block, what is it? 9.5. Now this is a sneak preview of something that I'm going to preview in more detail. I'm going to feature in more detail, but here you'll be seeing a sort of little test run of it, and I will make more of a formal announcement, if you get what I mean, or product launch. This isn't my product. This is something that a friend of Reloved has been creating, and sent me a complete set to try out. And I added tried out an earlier prototype, so it's sort of mostly his design, but a little bit of operational feedback from me. So I'll show you this thing in a bit more detail in a minute, but you can probably guess what it is. So the first thing I'm going to do is just very carefully, I'm not pressing that down, I'm just going to take back this little thingy, footy bit. Now, because I'm making this into an adjustable nut, I actually can afford this to, if it happened so, to overcut. But I don't really want to do it, but it's not the end of the world. Because it's an adjustable, we won't be sitting on the slot, on the curve. But let's imagine you were, and you wanted it to be a perfectly fitting thing. I'm going to show you a little thing, which I'm going to get out here, and plus a thing. Now I'm sort of, what's the word, guessing? No, yes, I'm grabbing at pieces for a minute. Let's see if I get the right one to start with. That should be about the right thing. So what we've got here is a very cool little invention. That's the wrong size. And this is an invention that is designed, that's the wrong radius. It's designed to allow me to shape nuts. So let me find the bits that work, the right sizes. Typical. Really will be worth waiting for. Hold on. It's always the last one you look for. Okay. So this has been designed by Bob. What can you see? Oh, you can see it. So we have a block, and we have, in this case 9.5, we have two sides to it. One is concave and one is convex. Concave one, naturally, this is radiused at 9.5, and there's a set. This one's 9.5. So at 9.5 on the convex side, I can radius this nut, and then on the other side, I can shape, from making a nut, I can shape the top of it as well, using the other side. So what we've got is we've got a block, a radiused block, with some adjustable locking screws, bolts. And the idea of this, I use a spacer. Now what am I going to do? I want to tidy up the underside of this. Now, Bob may look at this and think I'm using this terribly wrongly, right? And it's entirely possible, but this is how I've figured it out with no instructions, and that's kind of how I wanted to do it. So you can see I'm putting the thing in there. Now I've got a spacer, which I can put in there right now, and that is actually about the right size. So I'm going to just loosen this off and put the spacer in. And it's a cleverly made spacer, which I can push in as far as I want. And that allows me to, if I just move it around, I say, Bob's probably going, oh my God, that's not how you use it. But this is how I figured it out. So I'm dropping this in there, and I'm using the spacer, I'm moving the spacer down to give me as little or as much nut sticking out as I want. Now it's obviously loose in there. So if I now just tighten up these sides, it will grip the spacer, but with a bit of luck it should. No, I've done it. I've used too big a spacer. Right, that's a telltale sign. Let me get the smaller one. There's multiple spacers. I haven't obviously got them all out sensibly up front, which probably would have been a better thing to do, and then I would be less stab in the dark type carry on. But let's go. I'll just go with a smaller one, so that most of the grip is going to be the block on the nut. Anyway, so I drop that in to where I want the thing to sit roughly. I'm being a bit fairly caggy with it because this is a new undertaking for me, but let's say I want it to seat about there. Then I sort of bring it in. Now in this case the spacer is now going to be smaller than the nut, so this will grip the nut. And whoops, I can just tighten that up and have a look and see if it's looking like the radius is the way I want it. Well, the thing is, I haven't put it in exactly spaced, equally spaced, so I could probably give it a little shove in one or other direction. If I loosen this off, I could probably tap this down a little bit here, tamp it down. Whoops, spacer wants to fall out, and then I'll just tighten up, hopefully, by keeping the spacer in place as well. Okay, so the spacer's undersized. It's holding the nut pretty firmly. I think it's more or less right angles to the bottom. But anyway, the point, you can work out how better to use it. And the point being is I can get it on the convex side, and using this by hand, I can now hold this quite easily and just work up and down. This is 9.5. So interestingly, this is telling me that the nut appears to be flatter than 9.5. So I'm trusting Bob's radiusing. So that I don't know. Anyway, we're going to be on feet anyway. So that's an interesting one. Let's see how far it takes to get us to what it says is the right radius. Now, obviously, this isn't necessarily. If I do it this way, there's nothing really guaranteeing that this is set square to the sandpaper. All right, so it's not 100% guaranteed to be square on the bottom edge. But for my purposes, it's fine because I'm using the little feet. Now I'm just going to have a look and see how this fits. It's interesting that this radius, I'm pretty certain that this comes with a 9.5 inch radius, this black Tusq nut. It doesn't say immediately, and I'd have to go back online to check. Anyway, the point being is I'm going to try it out. I want it to fit in here, so I've got to get the thickness, the width exactly right. That's critical too. So I'll get me a block to thin it down. And obviously this is just a flat block operation, so it doesn't really need any clever tools. Just a matter of making sure you get a perpendicular edge. And we can also double check if we want to get a sense of how far off the mark we are. Here we have 311, 315, and this is 320, so we're a little bit high up. What we can do is we can go down the back side a little bit, take some of the writing off, which isn't necessary to be on there, and that's probably adding a bit of thickness to the nut itself. There we are, we're nearly on there. So again, tiny bit more here. It's interesting about the difference in radius. I'm slightly perplexed. I'm not sure I can. That's not going to be the right way around. Yeah, there's a very slight difference here. These don't agree completely. Yeah, this one's a little flatter than my 9.5, and actually that's the first piece of feedback, so that will be good. So it's registering as a little bit flatter. So it might be worth double checking the output from the printer and see whether it manages to do that precisely well. Now, the first thing about using the curving, so I'm going to put that on hold with that bit of feedback to check the radius. And I'm not going to do any more with it. I don't need to just now. I've got other ways, you know, more crude ways of doing it. There's a 9.5. No, it's not even. I can't remember what this one is now. It's probably a 12. Yeah, 12 inch. There's a 12-inch radius block from an old neck. You know, I've got different ways of doing things, but we'll get that looked at. So this is a perfect fit. The only question now is it low enough for my use as an adjustable? What's it? And I probably think it is, but if we don't think it is, we can do a tiny bit of adjustment, and here we can adjust the end, because we're going to just put it on stilts anyway, so I can afford to take a little bit down and have it sit a little bit lower in the slot to begin with. And that's what you'll find, is that when you start to lower it down, and it will probably end up being a flat nut anyway, which isn't a problem because we are going on little feet, as you know. I might go for a slightly rougher sanding block, and again, just trying to keep the verticalness of it. We could use the little red block for this. It's got a flat surface for doing this kind of straight sanding, but I currently have these out, so they'll do. So again, I'm just checking the squareness of it, and that looks pretty good. And just soften it off with the fine stuff, and then lay it in here. So now we'll get a sense. Now what's happened is it's got a little bit wider as we go higher. So I'm going to do a little tiny bit of sanding, and this time I'm going to push slightly forward on the front edge if I can, just to thin it down that part. That's a better fit. There we are. Okay, seated, sheeted. Let's have a look. Okay, so I think what I would do is if I still needed to take this down, I'll use that block, knowing that the radius isn't possibly quite right, but I'm still going to take a bit of of this curve out, because it's going to get in the way, just slightly in the way of the just causing it to just sit on the middle of the slot. So a bit making ends meet. No, make do and mend is the words I'm looking for. Okay, that's good. just check the flatness of the bottom. I'm expecting to see that is there and that is there. Just make sure this is clear of bits, nothing sticking in the way. Usually a bit of glue now and then. That looks pretty good because I don't think it was anyway glued in. So okay. I'm just going to do a little bit more on here and then we'll be ready. So what I'll do next is I'm going to actually I'm trying to think, is it the best way to do this to just put a flat base on this? So it probably is the best way. Let's just do that. Yes, sorry, mutter. So I'm going to just flat this out a minute and then now, of course, if I flatten it out, what's going to happen? It's going to appear to rock over the middle. That's okay because we're going to lift it up at the ends. So it's not going to go any lower than that, which seems about right. I'm doing work with my fingernails. Because I'm quite used to working with my fingernails. Okay, let's have a look. See if we just clear the middle of this. Okay, that's sitting nice and low. That's going to go up. Okay, we are almost there. So tomorrow I'm going to meet some people about possibility of playing in a covers band. It's going to be a new experience, first time in 2 years, possibly more. Right. So here is our very slender nut fitting perfectly. Now that's beautifully fitted, but it will be too low. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now do the miracle of the that thing, you know, the thing we call making it adjustable gov. Now with this one, because it's a curved one, I've got a feeling I might like to do this as I'm going to put 3 screws in this, give it extra strength. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark my screw positions with a shiny pencil, because being black this is hard to see, and I'm going to then proceed to make my start holes. Right, so I need this, I need the drill, I need a flat piece of MDF. I need the heater back on because it's starting to get cold around these parts. So this is a fairly, I don't know what the word would be. This is a part of the process which is quite freehand. So I get the thing and I'm going to check my speed. Yep, everything's good. And I place this where I want the start point. And then I make a drill and then I come upwards so that it's got more of a vertical start. So I'm recognizing that I'm going in at an angle on the nut, to begin with, and just to get the bite like this, and then that falls out of there like that. Yeah, so I get a start on it, and then I come down and drill a bit harder down, and then I do the same here. That one's a tiny bit out of place. So I've got 3 little starter marks. Now what I find helps now at this point is to get hold of the little drill bit of the size I'm going to use and just hand drill a little further into the starter hole, as straight a line as possible. This is not a very sharp one, so it's not making life too easy. Let's find a better one. There are usually a few around. There's one in the drill already, but just my luck. And there's probably several in here, but equally I can't get them out of here either. This one, please. Thank you. Plenty of little drill bits in that pot. Right, so let's drill a few more little turns, and then if we want to, we can countersink, just clean that up with the countersink. Now the thing is, now I'm going to take those little starter holes over to the drill, pillar drill, and I'm going to go through, which I can show you as a sort of long-range shot in the messy world over there. It's Kevin McKevin. Right, I need the wood. So this is where I'm going to drill down 3 holes, and it's a difficult one to see and execute, but I will do my best. Bear with me, please. Sometimes when it doesn't want to go in, you have to trick it. After a lot of faffing about, my first one is done. It's a hit and miss affair, I'm afraid. It's doing it on a slope that is the challenge, and having a very high pillar drill is not helping either. That's right. Not easy at all. But having practiced it before, it usually works. Come on, get it in place. Thank you. It's a lot of careful turning and testing and turning and testing. So then you end up with 3 little holes. Where are you? 3 little holes. Okay, the next bit is I'm going to knock my drill over. Next bit I'm going to tap the holes, go from the straighter bottom part of it, and these are going to tap up and through. So we've got 3 grub screws for this to give it the most support possible. Could partly be out of respect for the fact that I also know that 11 gauge strings are going on this, so it's going to be quite a lot of tension. But so what I found is that Tusq does this very well. Bone won't tolerate this kind of drilling and tap. Well, it'll do the drilling, but tapping it will split. Bone is more fibrous and wants to split. So once I've done this, I had two good things today. The first one is very good, is that Claire got a call from her people who did her screening test the other day, and they said they weren't concerned, so that was a clean bill of health. Thank God. I don't believe in God, but thankfully. So I can bet she's massively relieved, and I am too. So we can finally put that off our radar. And also tomorrow she has her last Herceptin for her breast cancer treatment. She's already had that. She finished the chemo a while back, but this Herceptin is something that goes on for another year afterwards. So it's not as unpleasant as the chemo by a long shot, but it's still, don't really quite know how it's making her feel. It's just once every 3 weeks. So anyway, it's the last one of a long year. Anyway, so we're going in for that tomorrow. So it's a hospital every day this week, except Monday, yesterday. Anyway, let me just grab that. I'm going to blow my nose. Yeah, so that's the best bit of news today. Pardon me. The other, a handy bit of news for me, is that a while back, I applied to JHS, John Hornby Skews, to have what they call a repairer trade account. Not a while back, it's a few weeks back. Anyway, and that's come through and sorted out, which is great. So I've got this trade account. It doesn't let me. It's not for buying and selling guitars at a trade price, because they. Now I'm just going to think of something. I've got to do something here, because this isn't going to work. I'm going to have to do something. I'll use the block again. Anyway, yes. So yeah, they've. So I've got this trade account. Like I say, it's not for buying guitars, because I'm not. It's not an account as a reseller of guitars or instruments or whatever. So they call it a repairer account, and what it means is that things that I use all the time, like pots, nuts, bridges, stuff, and if they, from their lines, which happen to be a lot of things like Wilkinson. The Encore vintage stuff, which I like anyway. So those I can use, and I will use. So I'm just going to, while we're here, I'll come back to that subject. So I've put my 3 screws in. What I'm going to do is I'm now going to withdraw them, actually, back out to a point where they're just sticking out, because these are A, too long, and B, they're sharp pointed ones, and I want to spread the load by turning them into flat bottom ones. But to begin with, I just dial them out so their little sharp bits are showing, and I gently put them in there for a second and get me a little hammer, and I'm going to make 3 little marks when it's in line. So I'll make sure it's lined up flush where I want it, like that, and I will do the middle one first. in the end, and then hold that and do the other end. I should be able to see 3 little marks. 1, 2, and that one smack bang in the middle there. Right, so what I'll first do is I'll get me a small drill bit, which I think I've just tidied away. Right, small drill bit, and I will make myself a little counter sunk recess, I suppose is the best word for it, in there. So I'm kind of drilling by fingertip pressure only, so just gently cutting in with a small drill bit, and then onto here, a little bit of this plastic, and then onto the other one. And then I'm going to get this wider one, and I'm going to just use that to do I'll make a little crater, and not too much, just a bit. And the aim of this is to just do enough to hold the grub screw from side to side movement, prevent it moving side to side. Okay, there are my 3 little marks. Now, they don't have any effect if you were to fit a regular nut later on. That's got no impact at all. So now, to get these to the right size, I'm going to take them most of the way down, cut off the extra excess from underneath. I don't need, so I need to leave a little bit to allow me to wind them into the body or into the nut. So this will be what I want to take off, the remains of these. So I get my flush cutty thing, which are a bit worn out, but they sort of will do. Won't you? Told you they were worn out. Crap. They are worn out. Thank you. Okay, so that's the lengths I want, and obviously I'm going to sit them in there, but I want them a little bit more flattened off. Now normally I would do this flattening on a flat block, because I might still do that. The problem is I have to get them back in, and it could be a problem if I should have pushed them out actually. Push them through, and then put them on a grub screw, put them on a flat block, and get this sanded flat. Now that's a bit of a kind of do it and guess really, but as long as we can make it so it's fairly smooth, then we can fine tune it on there. So I just don't want any sticking out bits. So it looks like a bit of a long drawn out thing, but it's really effective and it's worth doing. So, whoops, I moved. So these tiny little hex keys are vital. Okay. Again, they're not flattened yet, they're just rounded off to be the sharp bits taken off. Yeah, anyway, so yeah, I've signed up for a repair account, and that gives me money off, or better prices I should say, on quite a few of the things that I use regularly, including, thankfully, Tusq nuts. So I'm very pleased to be able to so I'm putting these in from the bottom upwards, then I can come through and connect up with them and pull them back for the final bit of, actually they're almost good enough. Anyway, yes, changing subject, back to the repairer's account. So better trade prices on some of the things, and it just means the good news is that the profitability that was taking a hit by virtue of everyone putting their prices up was I was having to line up to charge more for what I do, and actually the good news is that this trade account allows me to put that off, because I will be saving on buying through this account, saving what I would be losing, if you get what I mean, on the increasing prices out there in the world. So that's a nice thing to be able to know. So that's what I'm doing, being a trade account person. I'm just trying to flatten these grub screws off as much as I can. That looks pretty good. They're rounded off. So now when I put them through a little bit further, and a bit further, this thing will just be through far enough to sit in the little thingies, recesses I've made, and they won't go sideways. There we go. Ooh, look at that. Ain't that cool? It's like a bondage nut or one of those dog collars for tough people. Alright, so that's the other fine-tuney bit here. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put this back on until I push this all the way through. I don't quite know. Let's just double check where these are sitting. Seating. Should be right there. I might do a tiny bit more on these. Yes, so glad to say I won't have to increase any prices. Hurrah! Okay, that's where I am. If I take just take these grub screws down for a second, you should be able to push it down a fraction more. Flat as it goes, and then we'll raise it up from that to where the strings need to be. So I'm going to move a few things around, and then I'm going to get the neck joined to the body again, and then we need to get ready for precision fret leveling, for which we'll need some sacrificial strings. So we can get rid of all these clamps and stuff. Get rid of this drill, get rid of this hammer, get rid of this ruler. Yes, very little leveling will be needed, but it's there's part of me that sort of wishes that I could, oh please let it be good enough to skip that part of the process, but actually that's a shortchanging the process a bit. So I don't want to do that. I want to go through that, even if there's very little to actually do. We want to go through it because it gets it perfect. It's the best it can be, and you know, it'll be the most playable it can be as a result. So we don't want to find a way out of that, no matter how appealing the thought of giving it a miss would be. It's not. It's a false economy. Let's put that out of the way. So we've got the tuners up there, we've got the original nut, we've got the little tiny hex key, we've got the block that's going out the way, that's going in the bin. So we're nearly there. Nope, left behind. Yeah, so the good part of all of this is that, well, the sad part is I had to do an order of Tusq nuts and everything just recently, so I paid top Tusq dollar for that. But the good part is I can now line up a more of a bulk order. You know, sink some money, advance money into it, kind of buy in front, and yeah, get in a chunky order at a much better price. And it's not, you know, the great thing is the trade price is not even just because it's not dependent on volume. I can probably afford to buy more volume as a result, but it's really down to, you know, it's all down to a better price to begin with, and then what I'll get out of that is if I do buy some more bulk, then I'll get a good discount on top of that as well, which is even better. So reasons to be chuffed. I'm just going to put the neck back on. I forgot to charge up any of my power tools, so I shall be replacing these screws by hand. Slowly. Got a lot of potential movement in these necks, but then they do. That's the nature of a Strat or Telecaster. There's always the room to move it, and that helps you realign the strings down the neck. They don't have to be, and are usually not perfect. Yes, it's a bit tiring. I haven't even got enough power to whiz these screws in. So, yeah, good news on the health front from my wife, and then good news on the repairer's account, repairer's trade account, or whatever they call it. And I kind of said to them, you know, they were quite, you know, clear that obviously that the account I have is not one for, you know, buying 100 guitars and reselling them, or selling them, you know, and putting a retail markup, which is of course what, you know, people do when they run the guitar shops and stuff. So I'm not that, and I think it would require, you know, a different kind of account with different requirements and stuff, obviously, because there'd be more money and risk involved. But so they said that, you know, obviously nothing. They kind of said nothing on the catalogue is off limits. I can order anything, but you know, with some items like guitars within reason. So they're happy to sell me a trade price for my own workshop personal use, but they obviously will draw the line at me suddenly buying, you know, half a dozen vintage guitars and start seeing them appear on my Facebook or my website or whatever, or in eBay. So that's totally understandable. But you know, what I like, or what's great, is that it's not out of the bounds of possibility to have myself a very merry vintage guitar, should I wish to do it, or Fret King or something like that. And apparently they occasionally have some seconds or B stock or whatever, which they don't feature on the website, but they do let people know about. So if I was in the market for, you know, something with, he told me about a couple of guitars with neck pocket cracks, which they obviously can't sell, which are in their so-called B stock, which is, you know, it might be perfect for someone like me to, you know, do them up, check them out, do them up, and sell them on. Anyway, we shall see. But the main thing is, I'm very grateful that the trade prices will give me a chance not to, you know, give me a gap before I have to increase any prices. Right, so we need some sacrificial strings for this, and we're going to use the 11s, which I put off and put round the oak caster down there, I think. Yeah, it looks heavy duty enough. I know, spanners, I need some spanners, but I'm very careful with these. I make sure that they are done up tight before I turn them. Okay, so sacrificial strings will be the originals if we can get them back through the holes. It's a strung through, so I'm going to have to do a little bit of straightening string work first, which is always a bit of a pain. So just go off and make a cup of tea or something, or zone out now if you haven't already, because I'm going to pull these strings out one by one. Anyway. What else is there happening in the world? Oh yes, COP26. We don't even know what COP's 20 COP26. We don't even know what I don't even know what it stands for. God, that's a bit of a branding screw up, isn't it? What does it mean? COP, carbon offset promises, carbon overload, panic. I don't know what the 26 stands for. Did we lose? 1, 2, 3. Oh yes, I think we broke a string a little bit. We might have to find another one. Let's have a look. Problem with typically the problem with locking nuts is that they crimp the string and then they weaken it. So it's highly likely to break it if you undo it at that point, and certainly if you reuse it, you're likely to break it. So I tend to show when I come to rewire this. Rewire? Yes, restring this. I will show how I do it with locking tuners. I think actually I think Ian had that. I think Ian had some extra wire put around his tuners anyway, but having an extra centimetres worth of wire around the post is a really good idea, because it gives you at least one chance to slack the strings off and have another go if you need to take the neck off or undo them for some reason. If you don't have that extra, if you go straight through the locking tuner and pull it, lock it tight, pull it through and lock it tight, then you will not have that freedom to do it. And the chances are, if you have to take the strings off and then refit them, you'll be tightening them back up on the original clamped, crimped and damaged part of the string, and as a result it will usually break, costing you a new set of strings typically. So it's a pain. So an extra centimetre's worth is a wise move. Now once I've done this, I'm going to take a break, have something to drink, and clear or vacuum the work surface up. Oh, another thing I saw, I went for a cardboard run today. We went down. We started the day by going down to Plymouth because Claire's had to sort of face up to the fact that she is struggling to walk. Various spine injuries over the years, but she's struggling to walk very well at all. So she's applied for a blue badge. After all these years of struggling to walk distances. Anyway, so the people that administer this are pretty unpleasant. They're a bit like the was it Atos that used to do the disability benefit assessments? Kind of inhuman, and basically at that time, maybe they got the fingers burned a bit, but at that time they were pretty much charged with saving money and chucking people off their benefits, and 2/3, I believe it was 2/3, something very close to 2/3 of the all the appealed cases were then overturned. So it was a completely waste of money. The government sort of seemed to have conceived it as a way of chucking loads of people off disability benefits and back into work. And if people want to work and our society helps them get back into work, that's a great thing. But if people can't, and it's a cynical way of just trying to cut the benefits bill, then it's a pretty hideous and cruel thing. But anyway, and the common experience of the Atos, I don't know what they call them, assessors, was kind of overwhelmingly negative. They were cruel and unqualified in many cases, and really did do nothing but create the impression that they were about trying to save. They were on targets to save money, basically. Anyhow, so the blue badge people, they've outsourced that to a similar type of organisation. So we've had now 4 dates already scheduled that we've got ready to go down there, and Claire's had to fill this endless paperwork out. you know, to the nth level of intrusive degree, you know, like you're asking for, you know, £1 million fortune when all you're asking for is the ability to park a bit closer to the supermarket when you really most need to. Anyway, so that we've every single one of the meeting assessments that they've lined up to grill her at has been cancelled, and this one we got up to date and we drove to Plymouth, and Claire only checked her phone when we got there, and they had cancelled when we would have been halfway to Plymouth from where we live. So that was just a really crappy thing to do. Anyway, we were there, and so we did the second objective, secondary target, as the bomber command would have said, and that is we cruised around to Halfords to get some cardboard for packaging guitars. We always try to make the most of our runs. Anyway, today it was not massively productive, but I got one good quality box and a small one which could come in handy. So got some, but I also chatted to a nice guy who said how we're going to get busier and busier, so come in, you know, and he gave me the best days to come in, and running up to Christmas and so on and so forth. So I'm going to, by the way, just going to wind up the middle two strings first to keep the nut in place. So these strings now are all sitting on, these strings are all sitting on the first fret. Now, like I say, this neck will be quite a lot of loading, so we shall test the adjustable nut concept. So here we go, down with the grub screw, wind it out a little bit, down with the grub screw, wind it out a little bit, not much, just enough to lift it off the first fret and take up the load, take the strain, as it were. There we are, that's pretty good. Now, it seems like the middle one doesn't have to be as far in, but that's okay. Oh, maybe it is. Oh, let's try it. I don't want to lift it anymore, I just want it to take its share of the load. That's about right. Okay, so next thing we'll do is we'll put it, and I'll get it towards pitch. Now the thing about this, it's I'm going to start loading the neck preparatory to fret leveling. That's the problem with locking tuners. They're already weakened, that one was weakened, and I'm stretching it to make it play is too much. What I might just get away with doing for this purpose of this is I might, thankfully this little whatever it's called, bridge also doubles as a top mounter, so I'm going to top mount it for the time being, so we don't have to waste a whole new set of strings to get this part of the job done. That'll be cool. Thank you, get out of jail top mounter, top loader. Okay, we might need to raise that a bit. So the problem with locking nuts is you don't know how hard to squeeze down first. If you squeeze down too far, you run the risk of pinching and breaking the string inside the body of the tuner, in which case it's going to fail and it's going to break. So that is another reason why he says looking for his X key. That's another good reason why it's better to wrap some round there, because it'll encourage you to take some of the load off the locking part, which is a very blunt force pressing down. So yeah, so having putting an extra centimetre on, it encourages me, when I do it, to use less heavy force on the locking mechanisms in here. I don't have to depend on them so hard. It literally means I don't have to lock them down so hard. Nice. And that's good because then they are less likely to break, as that one just did. And you know, when you don't know how hard to lock it, it can be very, very difficult to know. What have you got to guide you? You just sort of, I don't know, you try, you think that's enough, and you stop and it's not enough. Okay, so we have pretty high action everywhere here, so let's start taking this down. Now the downside about these Wilkinson brass saddles is they're quite good and stuff. I generally like them, but if you have a fairly, not thin, but if the neck isn't overly wide and your bridge spreads the strings quite widely already, then if the strings settle on these, they take a natural position just slightly off where they should be, you can find the strings being quite worryingly close to the edge before you know what's happened here. So we're going for, I'm going to start with 1.5 all the way across. It's not what Ian wants. He wants 2.25. But I'm going to sort of ease it off for the purpose of fret leveling. So we have 1.5, 1.5, 1.5, about 1.5. Wrong side. 2-ish down. 1.5-ish, 1.5-ish. Right, so there's a good new all-round action. Okay, we're getting there. This one's a bit low, this end. We've also, by the way, we need to just double check the relief. So it wants a flat relief and there was too much on here. So I'm going to dial out some of this relief now, if we can, assuming that the neck responds the way we want it to. Blimey. It is going to dial out, isn't it? Problem with truss rods is you can't access them very well. There's not enough room and you get in and you can only turn them a certain amount. So I guess with 11s this thing is quite hard to straighten out. So it's a lot of force. Okay. So let's bring this up. Okay. Okay, let's just go back over these heights. Right, 1.5, fractionally over. 1.5, fractionally over, but not bad. Fraction over 1.5. Bit too much over 1.5. 1.5. And more than 1.5, and that's presumably that's sitting on the ground. That's as low as it will go. That's interesting. That's because it's standing on the screw, which is proud, so it's not a countersunk screw in the bridge, which is not brilliant. I have to say, it is possible that for this guitar we may have in fact arrived at for the action, and I've gone lower than the action that Ian wants. For the action he wants, this is playable straight off the refret. So what I'm looking out for, obviously, are any notes okay, the tiniest. That's nearly perfect. I will pour myself a drink. Looking at the relief, now it's flat. There's a little tiny gap. I'm going to do some fret leveling on this, but it's the best leveling, it's the best refret I've done. It's helped by the fact that I've set this very low, lower than Ian wants it, helped by the fact that it's still slightly higher than my normal fret height. But having said that, it's on the bass side, it's about the same as my normal action, so it's only a tiny bit different that I've currently got it at. And truth is, if I raised it up to the action right now that Ian wanted it at, those little tiny things would go away. But I just think I like it to be perfect. So if what I really want to do, truth be told, is I want to do it at 1.5 all the way across, and I want to say to him, why don't you try it at this? And all you have to do is, make your adjustments later on if you want to go up a tiny bit, do half, or actually one complete turn of this little screw driver is 1 millimeter. 1/2 a turn is 0.5 millimeter, so it's pretty convenient. What I'm not massively thrilled about on these bridges, that the strings do wander a little bit. So okay, that actually is pretty damn good. Well, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it because that's all part of the service. So we'll get and mark up the strings and get ready for it. It's yeah, it's I'm pleased that it's a very good refret in terms of start levelness. I mean, I could pretty much just about play that. I mean, I could play that. It's very small. There's no chokes on the bends, nothing that I can find. Having said that, my puny little hands aren't anywhere near good enough to really bend these strings up. So I'm not 100% sure if I physically can't bend 11s right up a semitone, then I'm not the best person in the world to assess them, but it's pretty good. But we'll do this and we'll get rid of that little bit of fret slap, and as I say, I'll lower this for the 1.5mm action and then check with him and say, you know, go on, try it, and if you don't like it, you know, go back up by, what were we saying, 0.75, 3/4 of a turn. There you go, that's all you'd have to do, 0.75 of a turn on each one, and that's totally doable. But you can see how it feels with new tall frets and, or taller compared to the flattened ones, new frets and a nice low action with no fret slap or buzz. And I think partly what's also making me do this is I still want to sand out the ends of the frets anyway in a sanding process, and I would have to do that. I would do that anyway, even if I didn't level these, so it's no big deal. So, right, there's my stuff. I'm going to take a quick break, then I'll come back. Actually, no, you know what I'll do? I'll do the leveling now, because then actually after that what I'll do is take a break while I polish out the strings. That's my kind of normal way around, so let's keep the system working. So, good old-fashioned familiar banana fret leveling tool, and we're going to calibrate it to this neck. And Kevin's doing some drilling downstairs, and it's like somebody is at the dentist downstairs. Right, there we go. So this should be interesting to see how this cuts. Now I know that even if I've done a nice level fret leveling, I do know that the neck will bunch up. Sorry, I've done a good fret pressing. I know that the neck will bunch up, compress under compression. But this, what I'm seeing is these, almost all of these are touching the tops with hardly any pressure. Perhaps the area I'm not getting any cut just at the moment is right up here. So there's probably a little kink where that neck joins the body, but I've now cut through that, and that's the smallest amount of, probably about as much leveling as is needed, and certainly on that side. So let me clean off the dust to begin with, or as we go along, and then I'll just do a quick test to make sure all individual notes sound great. A tiny little bit of zing there, so that's what I'll look for in the B track when it comes time to do that. So I'm now going to level, sorry, the G track. I'm now going to level the B track. The choke out only usually occurs as you go across into the G track, the third track. So I'm just going to keep my eye out for that and test the big bends when I get there. Chances are with old strings, especially when they've been put on tied onto locking tuners, you can break the strings with big bends at this point in the game, so I've got to sort of be aware of that. But as you can see, hardly spending any time on these leveling. Wow. Remember, this is it's about 0.3 of a millimeter higher than I would normally set it, so I'm getting a bit of an easy challenge here. I recognise that, I admit that, but it's still pretty good, and I will be immodest enough to say it's still a pretty good level fret pressing, fret hammering, tapping. So I'm very chuffed with it. Okay, here comes the G track, the track which sometimes, or usually, is the track that you have to work on a little bit harder to get the high E bends to work all the way across the fretboard, and it's usually somewhere in this top region that the notes will choke out a little bit, but this looks minimal. You know, and if Ben, if you're watching this, you'll notice how quickly I'm pressing through this, because it's very, very, there you go, bends are free. Oh, God, my poor pathetic little fingers. Right, now we're on to the D, and again I think now I'm sort of on the lookout now for what I call fret slap. I don't think there's any issues with single uneven frets, but I am on the hunt for just getting rid of those little choky notes at the top there. So we shall see what it finds up at this end. Hardly any, I mean, barely noticed it, but it's due to the way that the thicker strings move more. If we're going to find any fret slap, it's usually going to be on the fatter strings. I did a thing the other day where I did my very best to sort of, I say scientifically, and I'll do inverted commas, I tried my best to do a representation, visual. The tiniest bit right up there, and I'm going to do a little bit more on that. Yes, I did a best to do a representation of what you have to think about, or what's going on when you're getting fret slap, and I tried to visualize the movement of the strings in cones of movement, and it's very, very complex, because as you move further up the neck, the cones of movement get smaller, but they also move up a slope, the curvature of the neck. And so if you could see it as a sort of, what was that effect they used to have? It used to be a famous effect in multimedia. Oh my God, ghosting, trails. That's right. Anyway, if you could put trails on these various cones of string movement, you would see that they not only get smaller and tighter, but they move. Their start and finish point moves up a track of its own, a curve of its own. So it's a very complicated thing, and it's almost probably impossible to make a description, an accurate description technically, that isn't three-quarters. There's going to be a bit magical and fairy tale in it. But the important thing to recognize is that there's an inherent problem in the design of the guitar neck in relation to the playing length of the string, and it's just a pragmatic problem. For those who are interested, the center of your string is about here, right, the 12th fret. So the string moves most, and you imagine it's describing cones, smaller as you get down there. So it's like a cone lean, on its side, and the most movement's up here at about the 12th fret. However, the place of most bending in the neck is in the center of the truss rod, usually, possibly even a bit to the left of that still. But let's argue that it's the center of the truss rod, which is that much offset from the center of the string. So the strings are moving most here, and you've got most curvature relief from strings hitting the frets here. So that you can see there's inherently a mismatch and that you can't fix. Well, I did fix it. I actually made a guitar and put the design in an envelope and sent it to myself. Tiny bit there. tiny bit on the 9th fret. Yeah, so I made a guitar where the neck, center of the neck curve was exactly at the center of the truss rod curve. Sorry, the center of the string most movement was exactly at the center of the truss rod maximum curvature, and that was fun, and it was interesting, and it actually worked. But it put some constraints on what you could do with the guitar, and for example the pickups had to be over the strings. You could probably work out why that is another time. Anyhow, but the one of the problems you've got is that the place where your neck is an imperfect curve, which sort of plateaus here where the heel gets held in the grip of the body and bolts and so on. It's an imperfect curve, so it essentially has what I call a knuckle round about here, along with some ups and downs and bumps. So it's very imprecise, and the curved rod helps to smooth that out. So it does a good job of leveling individual frets, but it also helps to smooth out the general imperfection of the curve, and helps it to be a bit more of a bit of a more perfect curve, which helps to give a little bit more room that the strings didn't have before. Now, it doesn't fix the problem that the strings move most at the point at which they are slightly off to one side of where they have the most room to move. That's still the case. We can't fix that without redesigning the guitar, as I said, but this process seems to help to alleviate the problem by creating that extra little bit of room. So to keep it simple, that's what it does. One thing I'm curious about, because these are pulled back over these bumpy screws and there's no more backwards movement, I want to make sure that these are intonated. I think they may be too long, actually. Let's just do a quick check on the thing, because it doesn't help if we're starting off with the strings too far back. Anyway, yeah, when you try and explain this process and try and give it, the danger is you try and give it a sort of mathematical or scientific or, rational explanation, a perfect explanation, and in fact it is imperfect, so you can't, first of all, you can't get a perfect explanation. The second thing is that there's too many complexities for it to make sense. The explanation can't hold up all the way. You can only stop at a certain point and say, it is true that it improves the clearance here and here. That looks in good shape. What we might want to think of doing is replacing those proud screw heads with countersunk ones, flat ones. A bit long on the okay. Does that say long? Yeah. So let's have a look at the. Yeah, it should be about right. No, it's brains. Come on. No, back on the. No, it's not wound one, is it? It's a plain one still. Okay. Well, it's sort of about right. Old strings as well, but. All right. Thing again with this brass saddles, pairs of compensated brass saddles, there's an approximation happens between the these pair here. They're too far apart. The step back between the G, the A, the D steps forward a fraction from the G. Yeah, that's right. That's too long, but it could be the string. I think the A and the E are a little bit too long. We can push them forward a tiny bit. Yeah, so this is a compromise, this D and this G business. So it's not the best situation in the world. Okay, we've taken that off there, and that does mean that this is now flapping about because it's too low. That's okay. Okay, that's just a check, and we're off. We've got the grub screw actually off the screw, which means we could get even lower action. I know that's not what Ian wants, so we don't have to go after that, but we could have lower action. It's not. I hate it being prevented because of a defect in the choice of screws, or flaw in the choice of screws. Anyhow, so now I've got me a bunch of frets with a little bit more leveling on this side because of the fret slap, and it's making everything work just fine. So now it's time to dump these strings. So my advice is, when you've got a floating nut in, go from the outside in, so the outside pairs first and then these two, and that will stop it kind of zipping off sideways. Now the thing about this too is, once we take it off, this can move out. We can remove it if we want to, and put it back in. It's not glued down, so it's movable if we so choose. Somewhere here, let's get these. I'm going to cut off these old strings and consign them to the deep. We've got new ones waiting to go, and undo all the locking bits. Chances are this will be it will stay in place, this nut, but sometimes it's quite good to take it out anyway, because we can get a better run at the fret polishing. So you either just pull it out like that. We can check the holes. It seems to be bedding into sitting onto the wood. Now this, as you can probably guess, that this works because the works with the 3 grub screws touching down on the wood and or the plastic, so they are pressing against the plastic with quite a lot of downward force from the strings. So all I can say is, over time, my experience has been that they can settle a very small amount as they compress a little bit of the wood that they're standing on, but it's always been adjustable, and it then stabilizes, so that's why I include the little grub screw in case that needs adjusting. But for the ability to use a Tusq nut without having to cut the slots, that to me is one of the biggest, most important aspects of this, being able to do that without cutting the slots and making them ragged microscopically. So what we're using is the beautiful factory nut slots here. That's a bonus. Helps keep the tuning stable. Now I'm going to do something now which frightens me, because I've been caught out by this a few too many times before, but we have no choice, and that is masking off the fretboard. What I'm going to do is mask it off, and then I'm going to crown the frets, and then I'm going to polish them out. And the risk is that this low tack, even this low tack, may pull off the finish, and I hope to God it doesn't, because if it was going to come off, I would really appreciate that it came off first before we did the refret, because then we could do a refinish and then refret onto a good secure set of poly. This way around is the less desirable of the two. But anyway, so we have to put this down. I've seen people do fret polishings where they use a protector strip and a couple of fret rubbers, and I've just never seen how it can get, we're talking about removing 400 grit marks on these frets, and I don't really see a fret rubber doing that adequately. Fret rubbers seem to be great for polishing up tired looking dull frets, but you know, when you're polishing out frets after you've done fret leveling or fret work, you are on a mission to progressively reduce the severity of the scratches. So you start out with the scratches that your fret leveling paper had, and in my case that's 400 grit. All right, that's the sort of default roughness, and then after that you're on to now I'm not going to use this other tape because it is sticky. I'm going to use thin cut bits of low tack tape. Yeah, so you what was I saying? I can't remember now. Anyway, not important. Yeah, I'm keeping going with this low tack stuff. But yes, your job is to progressively erase the previous scratch level. So if you start with 400 of the leveling file, then you've got to go down to 600, and then you've got to go down to 1,000 or whatever you go to next, and so on and so forth until you get the scratches down to a level where they're so minuscule that it's shining, and that's the only real way around it. I don't see how you're going to successfully use a fret rubber to clean up 400 grit marks. It just doesn't seem feasible to me. Anyway, but people seem to do it on videos, and good luck to them. But this is how I know how to get those heavy duty scratches but down to a shine, and the consequences of that is that it requires masking tape to protect the fingerboard as we go through those different grades of paper. That's all I can say, really. And the risk is, in some of these old Fenders, the risk is that the finish falls right off when you come to remove it. I mentioned that before, and I don't really have any guide as to which batches or which particular factory had that problem, but somebody certainly did, and it's an absolute pain. Anyway, so meanwhile, I'm just trying to balance out all these bits of paper and use the right bits where I can. So things to do now on this is I'm going to recrown the frets on this. You'll see it takes a little bit more work on the ones that we flattened a bit more. Recrown it, so that means we return the frets where they've been leveled. We return them to a nice arch shape, the way they originally were, and then I'm going to polish them out, sand them out until they're a nice polish. So I'll show you the fret crowning part in a minute before I take a break, and then I'll do the sanding and polishing stuff off camera, as I want to do. So this week and next week I am mostly refretting this and Karen's Strat, Ian's Tele and Karen's Strat, and that Strat, Karen's Strat, has attracted a lot of attention on the Facebook page where I've posted the condition those frets were in. I mean, it's a bit of a mucky story, and I don't really know what's happened to that guitar, but my worry is that Karen's been led a bit of a merry dance, but then we always, one tech always thinks that about somebody's experience with other techs, possibly. I mean, the reason I am critical at all about them is because the frets aren't even seated properly, and then they've been ruined in the fret leveling process. So the fret job at the moment is unsavable. So I feel entitled to be critical of that, because she doesn't sound like she knows why that was done or what was done exactly, and I think it's probably an unhappy surprise to find out that it's unsavable or it needs refretting. I mean, I don't, it doesn't really pay to speculate, but I just know that I'm not even convinced that it's a mighty mite neck. It could, for all I know, somebody could have just soldered that and cobbled together some stuff and done a terrible fret job, and you know, most people wouldn't know, and you can't blame them for not knowing. They're not experienced in it. Why would they know? Anyway, so my sort of worry is that that's what happened in Karen's case. And anyway, as always, I have to say as I find and put right as best I can. And in the case of Karen's Strat, it without a doubt has to be refretted. You know, I'm not just doing it because I like refretting. You know I do, but it has to be done. Otherwise, it won't. I can't make it play again in that condition. A couple of frets up here are actually fixed so far out of the fingerboard that they've got fresh air underneath them, and as a result they've already been hacked, half gone by a fret leveling process, because they you know, that somebody's tried to make them playable and they aren't. As simple as that. Anyway, it's going to be interesting. Well, no, it's going to be just great to get it done. I'm looking forward to making it, fixing it, and so she enjoys it. That's my part in it. That's what I see. So these frets here are not jumbo frets or any type. They're on the sort of small side of medium jumbo, I would say. I always tend to go a little bit higher in the refret, for the simple reason that I can't predict what the seating of the frets will be like. I can get it, you know, I can hope that I get it as good as possible, but sometimes things happen and you have to level your way out of it. This isn't one of those. This is pretty good right from the get-go. But if you have to level your way out of trouble or out of those difficulties, then the problem is you need that little bit of extra, and it's only a tiny amount you need, but it's, you know, it'll be in the sort of region of a 1/10 or 2/10 of a millimetre. So I like to make sure I've got that leeway. Otherwise, you know, we could be, you know, we can end up with it all playing beautifully, but it's low or lower than, you know, when the frets that the customer sent. So we don't want it like that. So I go a little bit higher to give myself the room. Now, there's virtually nothing to level out on the treble side of these, and I'm only seeing the smallest little bit of leveling, as you can hear, tiniest bit being done on the bass side of the frets, and done. And that's kind of typical of the situation where I'm having to just create that little bit of extra room to counteract the compression ups and downs, the bumps of the neck, the peculiarities of the neck landscape. Now this one here is the first one that has a little bit of leveling that tracks all the way across, but again, still really, really little. And again, a bit more on this side here. Done. So I guess the scary bit that once I've done all the sanding and I remove the paper is going to be done off camera. So I will come back in floods of tears, or just happy that we're moving forward. The great thing about this is that when you get your frets done, leveled for a particular action and a particular gauge of strings, you can take the whole guitar apart again, take the neck off, do something else with it if you have to. I might, for example, if I wanted to do any finish on the edges, if I need to, and I can take the neck off. I don't have to do the whole guitar. I could even take the neck home, do it at home, bring it back the next day, just lightly sand and buff out the edges, and then put it all back together. And with 12s on, it'll go back to the same setup that we had just now, because, you know, we've tamed the frets for the action we've chosen, for the gauge of strings that we're using. And because it was a good refret, there's very little required to do that taming. It sounds a bit extreme. So I'm about half an hour of sanding away from knowing whether this is the tapers are going to all come off properly, or whether we've discovered yet another one of those American or Mexican Fenders. I think it's mostly American, if I'm honest. American. I'm not sure it's so many Mexicans, but it gets me nervous. As soon as I see Fender and maple, I'm nervous. Right, so I'm going to shut off, put the radio on, and then I'm going to get this bit done, and I'll come back when it's polished out, and actually we're pretty much ready to put some new strings on. And I'll give this a clean up as well. See you shortly. Okay, D'Addario 11 to 49s on, well, heading on. So, polished out, everything done. Now let's turn around and show you a close-up. This is how I do it. So, I tend, with an adjustable nut, I do the middle two first. So we're talking D, let's line these up, shall we? D and G first, just to hold the nut in place, and go from there. There we are. So D first, onto the nut, make sure it's all the way through, and then I pull back a sort of finger's worth, probably about a centimetre, and then I lock it, but I don't do it too firmly, and then I sort of wind it on, and that equals about half a turn. Seems to be enough. Then the G, and I think the good thing about doing it this way means you not only don't risk over crimping the string as it goes through, which can be one of the reasons why it breaks, but you also give yourself a little room so that that little bit that's wound around there, if I were to take the thing off to move something, next time, rather than push it through to the same point and have it biting on the same bit that it's crimped already, I can push the crimped bit through, and now this time not pull it back, so it pushes the already used and damaged bit through, and we'll end up clamping on a fresh piece of string. That's the clever idea behind it, and it does make sense sometimes. Actually, it tends to happen more when I'm setting up tune-o-matic bridges on Les Pauls, because quite often you get everything done and then you find out you have to change the saddles around to reach the correct intonation point, and that can be a real pain. And if you've already crimped down your locking tuners at full stretch of the string, then that will cost you a set of strings, as well as the pain in the butt of having to change the saddles around, which nobody wants to have to do, and had they designed a better bridge, nobody would have to do. But we won't go on about that. So, here we are. So basically, everything crowned, sanded and polished out, and now basically get the strings on, stretch them out, double check the intonation, which should be about right anyway, but we'll check it, and then we'll snip off the excess bits, and then that'll be done. I had a good look at the edge of this fingerboard, and I've sanded it back and made it very smooth, and I think it's perfectly in keeping with the wear of the guitar. You know, that it's not. The thing about putting fresh poly on is that you end up putting quite a lot on, and it kind of it ends up looking a bit newer than it did, if you get what I mean. So in keeping with the softness of this guitar, and basically there's hardly any finish on the neck anyway, I just think it's probably better to leave it sanded smooth as it is. It's a small thing, but it's always a judgment call, really. There are occasions when, if it's a newer guitar with a much glossier finish, sometimes you would go and rebuild the poly on there, but you have to extend further over the edge and stuff, and so it's never quite, yeah, it's always a compromise. But, you know, I think this feels very smooth and nice. So I'm just going to pull these on, bed them in a little bit. And so the secret of tuning, as I've said loads of times before, is to make sure that there's that you get all the slack out of your strings first. Where's this? Positioning of this is a bit funny. Yeah, you've got to get all the slack out of your strings. That's critical. And the other major component is getting a nut that strings can run through without catching or dragging or without any friction, and that's where the Tusq adjustable nut comes in, or the Tusq nut, but including the adjustable one. So what I do first, yeah, so anyway, just to reiterate that point, it's the tuning is all in the tuning stability is all in the nut and the stretching of the strings. Okay, so we start from there. Yeah, so the tuning stability is all in the string slack and the condition of the nut, and that's why I like to go to as great a length as possible to make sure that we're if we can, using untouched nut slots. Of course, you can buy. I've got files here. I've got the Hosco ones. I've got the Hiroshima ones. But actually, the truth is, even when you cut with the best files, you still create a slightly shaggy slot. There's nothing better than, you know, the extra, you know, icing on the cake is if you can keep the original factory slots, because they're molded and they're beautifully smooth compared to cutting them yourselves. Now, cutting them is fine. You can get a brilliant nut by cutting them. Sometimes you have to, if you have to build a custom nut, for example, where there is no alternative. But wherever possible, I like to go with the factory slots. Okay, so tightened up again, up to tune, up to pitch, and stretch them again. Thumb and forefinger, get rid of all of that slack. Heavier gauge strings seem to be quite good at getting the slack out fairly quickly, but you know, most people, most of us throughout my life, I didn't get this till later, but most of us just don't. We totally underestimate how significant the slack in the strings is and the role it plays in lack of tuning stability. So all of my youth, I was just stretching the strings for 2 minutes or 10 minutes maximum, 5 minutes at max, and then just playing, and you know, guitars would go out of tune. I'd blame the tuners and I'd blame the guitar and so on. And actually I've discovered that it's about the nut and the slack. And once you get slack gone and the nut right, and everything's going to be fine. So you start to get to a point where less and less detuning happens, and you get pretty close. Now, I could go on further. I tend to hold back a little bit, because in reality, the more you pull at your strings, the more likelihood I'm going to break them for you. So situation like this, I don't have a spare set of 11s. Okay, now this is, now I'll double check the action, and we'll make sure that it's set at 1.5 to begin with, like we said, and then we'll consult with Ian and see if he wants to leave it there or if he wants to take it to something else. Now this was high before because we couldn't get it down any further, so now I can take it down. Tiny bit, not much. Are we still standing? We're right on the edge of that screw, so I actually think that is the lowest we can get with this. Realistically, that is, that's annoying. That screw annoys me just because I can't get it down as low as I would like. Where it's positioned, that's stopping us going any lower, but you know, so it doesn't look brilliant to me because I would have that a tiny bit lower personally. This is actually 2mm. To change these over would require getting a set of screws, and maybe that's something to consider. I might consult with Ian on that, but we are on this base E, we are just under, we're about 1.75, that's a fraction higher than I like. That's 1.5, that's 1.6-ish. Where have you gone? Oh yeah, there you are. G 1.6-ish, 1.5, 1.5. 1.5. So they're good. It's just the high E that's a little bit off. But we know how to put it right if we want to. Nice. Let's check the intonation. It would be great if we could come forward on those strings, because that would free us up to drop that low E down to where I really secretly want it. But it's, you know, it's a bit academic really, because it's higher than where Ian said he ideally wanted it. So we'll go with what the customer wants. But you know, at least we know that that's a constraint. Should you ever want to lower it, that is a constraint. So that's telling me that's too long, but there's nothing we can do about it because it's compromise. The position of this is always a compromise between the two. I'm going to accept that that's a bit too long and push the whole lot forward. Let's try what happens. Still a fraction long, so let's push it forward a tiny bit more. See what we can. Oh, wrong way. Oh. Because the relative intonation is fixed between the pairs, the strings in the pair. You can only have it set perfectly on one. It means you have to compromise or go between the two, or set it on one and accept that the other one is out. Closer. Let's keep going and see what the limit is on this. We might, in that case, if I go a bit further, we might actually get this thing off the screw. Let's take that as a start point and see what happens with these others. So 1, 2, back, 1, 2, back. Actually not bad. Let's see if we can get this thing off the, what's it? That'd be great. Come on, off there, maybe. Still a bit flat, so that tells me we can push a bit off here. Let's see what we get. I'm not convinced about this darn thing. That one's a compromise between sharp and flat. Slightly flat. I think that's a better positioning. That allows us to drop that down a fraction. Don't tell me I'm obsessed, I am. This one's fraction, no, back fraction short. Yeah, it's the three pairs of two compromise, I'm afraid. It's as good as we can get with the compromise. You're never going to get it perfect because there's up to 3 mm difference between these two, the pairs, and you might only need, realistically, you might only really be looking for a millimetre between them. So you've got this extra 2 mm throwing it off, and so one is going to be flat, or you balance out the difference between the two. Hard to know exactly where to place it, but again, the solution to that is getting a 6 saddle one. I don't know. I like compensated saddles, but I prefer them when they're like, let me just find one. I prefer them when they're like, no, not like this. Anyway, I haven't got one just to hand. But I prefer them when they're a narrower spread, pre-compensated, like the Tunematic pre-compensated bridges. Okay, we got our bits and pieces here. Everything done. All done. Neck on. Alignment good. There's one thing that's bugging me just slightly, and I'm afraid there's not a lot I can do about it. It was there from the beginning. It's just this little extra bit of, oh, it's not bugging me anymore. It's a piece of sticky tape that's picked up some dust. I thought that was a mark. Maybe it was there before. Maybe it's come from before. Somebody's left it on the guitar from before, and I've just got rid of it. Hooray! Oh, I'm really pleased. That was bugging me. It was there when the guitar came, and I thought it was like a ding and a scratch, and it's turned out to have been a piece of grease or adhesive that's picked up a load of gunge. I mean, there's a bit there, but that's just the end of the. It's just the end of the end of the skunk strip stripe. Right, there we have it. All good, refretted, set up. So let's just double check what we've done. New nut. The original is off to one side here, and I'm going to tape these to the deck here. So new nut, adjustable nut. We've refretted, set it up with a lower action, and I can adjust this at home if the email comes back and Ian is certain that he wants it at 225. But it's perfectly done at what is it now? It's 150, 160, something like that. So I'm going to check and see if he would like that. Otherwise, I'll just do these down 3/4 of a turn or whatever it was I said. That's fine by me. It's no big deal. We can take care of that at home. So that's refretted with Evo Gold, beveled ends treated and ready to go. New strings fitted, stretched out, intonated. So it's it's a nice creature, and it will play at a lower action. That's the thing. Lush. Wow. Okay. Thank you for watching. I will wrap it up for tonight, and I'll see you again soon at Reloved Guitars with Karen's Stratocaster refret coming up shortly anyway. Thanks for watching. See you again.